Hello guys, welcome to Pika Fiction. So in this video, we will see,
what if Ash became the ultimate Pokémon tactician who never lost a single battle? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story.
Chapter 1. The Shadow of the Mountain. The wind had teeth. It bit at the exposed skin on their necks and tore at the edges of their jackets, a relentless, howling thing born in the high, lonely places of the world. The path was a merciless scramble of scree and stone, a narrow ribbon clinging to the side of a peak that scraped at a sky the color of bruised slate. Below, the world fell away into a sea of mist, concealing valleys and forests under a blanket of impenetrable white. It felt like walking on the edge of nothing.
Pikachu, a familiar spot of brilliant yellow against the gray expanse, shifted his position on Ash's shoulder, his ears twitching against the gale. He chirped a low, questioning sound, a query that needed no words. Ash reached up a gloved hand and scratched the base of one of those long, black-tipped ears. "Almost there, buddy," he murmured, his voice a low hum against the wind's roar. "Brock said the pass level's out just beyond this ridge." "Brock said that an hour ago." Serena's voice, though raised to be heard, carried a note of wry humor. She was a few paces behind him, her movements sure-footed and graceful even on the treacherous terrain, her honey-blonde hair whipped into a frenzy by the wind. She pushed a stray strand from her face, her blue eyes sparkling with a mixture of exasperation and exhilaration. Are we sure he wasn't looking at the map upside down? Up ahead, Brock paused, turning back with a grin that was half hidden by the high collar of his coat. A good geologist trusts the feel of the rock, not just the lines on a page. And these rocks, he patted a massive boulder beside him like an old friend, are telling me we're nearly at the summit. He adjusted the heavy pack on his shoulders, his posture unbowed by its weight. Besides, a little climb is good for the soul, builds character. Serena laughed, the sound snatched away by the wind. "My character is sufficiently built, thank you very much. My legs, on the other hand, are lodging a formal complaint." Ash smiled, a quiet, easy expression that seemed to warm the air around him. It was a familiar rhythm, this easy banter that had carried them across countless miles and through a dozen regions. The journey was the destination, a truth he had learned long ago. Every mountain climbed, every forest navigated, was as much a part of his path as the battles he fought. They were moments to connect, to understand the world his Pokémon inhabited, a world of harsh beauty and unforgiving landscapes. He felt the steady, powerful presence of his team in their Pokéballs at his belt, a silent chorus of strength and trust that was as constant as his own heartbeat. They crested the ridge, and the wind, as if to reward their persistence, momentarily softened. Before them, the path widened into a broad, flat plateau, a natural amphitheater of stone surrounded by jagged, tooth-like spires of rock that clawed at the clouds. The air was thin and sharp, smelling of cold stone and ozone. It was a desolate, breathtaking place. And they were not alone. He stood near the center of the plateau, a solitary figure seemingly carved from the mountain's own granite. He was tall and lean, clad in dark, practical traveling gear that bore no insignia or mark of origin. His face was sharp, angular, and his eyes, when they locked onto Ash, were of an unnerving, pale intensity. They were the eyes of a predator, utterly focused and devoid of any discernible emotion. At his side stood a Metagross, its massive, four-legged body impossibly still. The metallic sheen of its armor seemed to absorb the bleak light of the overcast sky, giving it the appearance of a living shadow. There was no surprise in the man's posture, he had been waiting. "Ash Ketchum," the man said. His voice was flat, a monotone that carried with unnerving clarity in the thin air. It wasn't a question. Ash met his gaze, his own expression calm, unreadable. Pikachu's cheeks sparked, a low, crackling hum of warning. Ash gave a nearly imperceptible shake of his head, and the sparking ceased. "You have me at a disadvantage," Ash replied, his tone even. "My name is Kale," the man stated, offering no further explanation. "I was told I would find the unbeaten trainer in these mountains. They said you were seeking a challenge worthy of your reputation." Brock and Serena exchanged a look. There was something off about this, a tension that went beyond a typical roadside challenge. The man's stillness was unnerving, his Metagross a silent monolith of latent power. There was no bravado here, no eager spark of a trainer hungry for a good fight. This felt like an appointment. My friends and I are just passing through, Ash said, his eyes never leaving Kale's. He was scanning, assessing. The way Kale stood, his weight perfectly balanced. The slight wear on his boots, suggesting long travel. The absolute lack of wasted movement. This man was no amateur. Your path has led you here, Kale countered, a faint, almost imperceptible stress on the word path. As has mine. I wish to verify the legend. A single battle. 3 Pokémon each. Ash felt a familiar thrum in his chest, the quiet surge of anticipation that preceded every battle. It wasn't about ego or a desire to prove the legends true. It was about the test, the conversation that could only be had through strategy and strength. It was about meeting another trainer, another team, and understanding their story in the space of a fight. But this felt different. He looked at the Metagross, its cold, impassive red eye fixed on him, and he knew this would be more than just a battle. It would be an examination. He slowly unzipped his jacket, the sound loud in the sudden stillness. All right, he said, his voice dropping slightly, losing its conversational tone and taking on the quiet authority that signaled his focus. I accept. Serena took a step back, her hand instinctively going to the Pokeball at her side. Brock moved to stand with her, his arms crossed, his friendly demeanor replaced by a keen, analytical watchfulness. They knew this Ash. This was the master tactician, the trainer who saw the world in terms of angles, probabilities, and the unbreakable trust between him and his partners. Kale gave a single, sharp nod. He returned his Metagross without a word, the beam of red light from its Pokeball seeming to vanish into the gray air. He then expanded his arm, a different ball already in his hand. The challenger will make the first move. The plateau would be their arena. The wind was their audience. Ash took a deep breath, the cold air filling his lungs. He could feel the fine grit of the stone under his boots, the direction of the wind on his cheek. He noted the placement of the larger boulders, the patches of loose scree, the way the jagged spires would cast long shadows if the sun ever broke through the clouds. Every detail was a variable, a potential tool or a potential weakness. Sceptile, I choose you. Ash tossed the Pokeball in a smooth, practiced arc. With a flash of light, the forest Pokémon appeared, landing in a low crouch. His yellow eyes, sharp and intelligent, immediately surveyed the terrain and his opponent. The blades on his arms were like polished jade, and a twig, as always, jutted from the corner of his mouth. Kale's response was immediate. Aggron. The iron armor Pokémon materialized with a ground-shaking thud that sent vibrations through the stone. It was a beast of pure defense, a walking fortress of silver-gray plating. It let out a deafening roar, a challenge that echoed off the surrounding peaks. A test of power versus speed, Brock murmured, his eyes narrowed in concentration. Classic opening gambit. Not with Ash, Serena whispered back, her gaze fixed on her friend. It's never that simple. Kale made no move to issue a command. He simply watched, his pale eyes fixed on Ash. He was seeding the opening, waiting to see what Ash would do with it. It was a test of initiative.
Ash didn't shout. He didn't need to. Sceptile. Leaf blade.
The command was almost conversational, but Sceptile reacted as if shot from a cannon. He became a green blur, rocketing across the plateau, the blades on his arms glowing with a verdant, razor-sharp energy. He closed the distance in a heartbeat, a silent, lethal projectile. Iron defense, Kale said, his voice still a monotone. Aggron didn't move. Instead, its metallic hide glowed with a brief, intense light. Sceptile's leaf blades struck the massive Pokémon's flank with a screech of protesting metal, like knives scraping against a vault door. Sparks flew, but the attack did no visible damage. Sceptile used the rebound to flip backward, landing lightly on his feet 50 yards away. Ash's expression didn't change. He had expected that. It was a probe, a way to gauge Aggron's defensive capabilities. Now he knew. Its fortitude was exceptional. Quick attack, circle him, Ash said. Sceptile moved again, but this time he didn't charge head-on. He became a fluid ribbon of motion, circling the lumbering Aggron at incredible speed, kicking up dust and scree. He was a phantom, too fast for the bigger Pokémon to track effectively. Metal burst, Kale commanded. Aggron stomped its foot, and its body flashed with a strange, shimmering energy. It was a counter move, designed to reflect damage back at an attacker. But Sceptile wasn't attacking. He was just moving, forcing Aggron to remain a stationary target, a fortress in the center of a storm of his own making. Ash watched the pattern. The circling, the dust, the way Aggron's head slowly turned. He saw the opening. Not in Aggron's defense, but in Kale's strategy. Kale was relying on pure defense and reactive damage. He was waiting for a mistake. Ash would not make one. Now, Sceptile. The ground. Sceptile, without breaking stride, angled his approach. His glowing leaf blade didn't strike Aggron. It sliced downward, gouging a deep trench in the stone plateau directly in front of the iron armor Pokemon's feet. The attack was so fast, so precise, that a huge shard of rock was instantly destabilized. What's he doing? Serena wondered aloud. Focus punch, Kale ordered, seeing the potential threat. Aggron began to gather energy in its massive fist, a sphere of brilliant white light forming. But it was too late. Leaf Storm, Ash called out, his voice sharp and clear. Sceptile leapt into the air, spinning like a top. He unleashed a furious, swirling vortex of razor-sharp leaves. But he didn't aim it at Aggron. He aimed it at the trench he had just carved. The torrent of leaves blasted into the fissure, acting like a high-pressure wedge. The destabilized slab of rock, meters wide, groaned and then erupted upward, tilting like a seesaw and lifting Aggron's front legs clear off the ground. For a single, vital second, the walking fortress was off balance, its heavily armored underbelly exposed. Now, Ash said, a hard edge to his voice, Giga Drain. From his position in the air, Sceptile fired a volley of glowing green tendrils of energy. They struck Aggron's vulnerable underside, siphoning its strength. The massive Pokémon roared in pain and frustration as its energy was drained away, the Giga Drain bypassing its incredible defense completely. It staggered back, crashing down onto the stone with a deafening boom. It struggled to rise, but the combination of the energy drain and the awkward fall had taken its toll. Aggron is unable to battle, Brock said, his voice filled with awe. He wasn't acting as a referee, just an observer stating the obvious. He never even touched it. He defeated a pure defense Pokémon by using the battlefield itself as a weapon. Kale recalled his Aggron without a word, his expression unchanged. There was no frustration, no surprise. It was as if he was simply cataloging the result. Impressive. You neutralized a superior power type by creating a tactical weakness where none existed. He pulled out his second Pokeball. Let us see how you handle an opponent you cannot outmaneuver. Salamence. The dragon Pokémon appeared with a roar that was 100 times more ferocious than Aggron's. It unfurled its massive, blood-red wings, and the wind from their downbeat was a physical force, blasting across the plateau. Its eyes burned with savage intelligence, and it hovered in the air, a picture of untamable aerial dominance. Ash met Sceptile's gaze. The forest Pokémon was breathing heavily but gave a confident nod. Ash nodded back. Good work, Sceptile. Take a rest. He recalled him, the beam of red light a stark contrast to the gray sky. He held the next Pokeball in his hand for a moment, feeling the familiar weight. An aerial battle was different. The terrain mattered less. It was a contest of speed, power, and three-dimensional positioning. Kale had chosen Salamence to take the ground away from him, to force a direct confrontation. Infernape, let's go. The flame Pokémon burst into existence, a whirlwind of fiery energy. He landed on the plateau with a crackle of power, the flame on his head burning with a fierce, brilliant intensity that seemed to push back against the mountain's cold. He pounded his chest and let out a defiant cry, his eyes blazing as he stared up at the hovering dragon. A fire type against a dragon, Brock noted. A disadvantage in terms of raw-type matchup, but Ash must have a plan. Dragon Rush, Kale commanded instantly, wasting no time. Salamence became a cerulean comet. It shrouded itself in a draconic aura and plummeted from the sky, a living missile aimed directly at Infernape. The sound of its descent was a terrifying shriek. Dig, was Ash's simple, one-word command. Infernape didn't hesitate. He spun, his powerful hands clawing at the stone. In a shower of rock and dust, he tunneled underground just as Salamence impacted the spot where he had been standing. The resulting explosion of force shook the entire plateau, cracking the stone and sending fissures snaking out from the point of impact. Salamence roared in frustration, pulling up into the air and scanning the ground. Kale's eyes were also scanning, anticipating where Infernape would emerge. He was trying to get inside Ash's head, to predict his next move. "He'll try to come up from behind," Kale said, his voice holding the first hint of something other than monotone. It was a cold, analytical certainty. "Salamence. Flamethrower, full circle. Scorch the earth."
The dragon obeyed, hovering in place and unleashing a continuous, sweeping torrent of fire that incinerated the surface of the plateau in a 360-degree radius around it. It was a devastating defensive maneuver, designed to hit Infernape the moment he broke the surface, no matter where he appeared.
"Brutal," Serena breathed, shielding her eyes from the intense heat. "There's no way out." But Ash wasn't looking at the ground, he was looking at the sky.
Now, Infernape. Mach Punch. A section of the plateau behind Kale, far outside the radius of the flamethrower, suddenly exploded upward.
Infernape burst out, not from the ground, but from the side of a rock spire. He hadn't just dug down, he had tunneled through the very rock of the mountain, a feat of incredible power, emerging at a higher elevation. He was already airborne, his fist glowing with the energy of the priority move. He had used Dig not to attack, but to reposition himself onto a new axis of attack. Kale's eyes widened a fraction of an inch. It was the first sign of genuine surprise he had shown. He had been so focused on a two-dimensional plane that he hadn't accounted for a vertical flanking maneuver.
Salamence wheeled around, but Infernape was too fast, too close. The Mach Punch slammed into the dragon's side with the force of a battering ram, sending it careening through the air. "Don't let it recover. Flare Blitz," Ash commanded, his voice sharp. Engulfed in a shroud of brilliant blue and orange fire, Infernape shot after the tumbling dragon like a meteor. He tackled Salamence in midair, and the two were consumed in a massive, fiery explosion that lit up the grim sky. The shockwave rolled across the plateau.
Both Pokémon fell from the smoke cloud, plummeting towards the stone. Salamence was unconscious, its wings limp. Infernape, though battered and smoking from the recoil of his own attack, twisted his body and landed in a crouch, his flaming hair flickering but still burning bright. He was hurt, but he was standing. Kale recalled Salamence. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the whistling wind and Infernape's ragged breathing. Two of his Pokémon, both chosen to counter specific strategies, had been dismantled by tactics he hadn't even considered. His analysis had been based on a library of known battle styles, of common counters and predictable maneuvers. Ash Ketchum did not operate from that library. He wrote a new page for every battle. "Your capacity for unconventional repositioning is unprecedented," Kale stated. He looked at Ash, and for the first time, his gaze seemed to hold something more than cold assessment. It was a flicker of genuine, academic curiosity. He held up his final Pokeball. "But every battle, every strategy, relies on the bond between trainer and Pokémon. A bond that can be measured. A bond that can be broken." He threw the ball. Alakazam. The Psy Pokémon materialized in a shimmer of psychic energy, floating cross-legged a few feet above the ground. It held a silver spoon in each hand, its eyes closed as if in meditation. The air around it grew thick, heavy with an almost visible pressure. Ash recalled the exhausted Infernape with a word of thanks. He looked over at the small, yellow Pokémon that was now perched on his shoulder once more. "It's our turn, buddy." Pikachu leapt to the ground, landing silently. His cheeks sparked with contained power, his red eyes focused and sharp. He looked tiny and fragile compared to the psychic powerhouse floating before him. "You believe your bond is your greatest strength," Kale said, his voice dropping low. "I will demonstrate that it is your greatest vulnerability. Alakazam. Psychic." Alakazam's eyes snapped open, glowing with an intense blue light. It didn't fire a beam or a wave of energy. Instead, Pikachu was simply lifted from the ground, trapped in an invisible, crushing grip. He squealed as the psychic pressure intensified, his body contorting. "Pikachu!" Serena cried out. A direct assault on the Pokémon's mind and body, Brock analyzed, his voice tight with concern. "There's no physical defense against that." "Volt Tackle," Ash said, his voice still impossibly calm.
It seemed like a futile command. Pikachu was immobilized.
But in response to Ash's voice, a furious torrent of electricity erupted from Pikachu's body. He cloaked himself in a high-voltage aura, the raw power so intense that it created a visible distortion in the air, fighting against the psychic hold. The two invisible forces, psychic energy and raw electricity, warred against each other. For a moment, Pikachu was suspended in a storm of his own making, unable to move but resisting the crushing force. You cannot win a battle of wills with an Alakazam, Kale stated. Its psychic power is absolute. Increase the pressure. Alakazam's eyes glowed brighter. The spoons in its hands began to bend from the sheer mental force it was exerting. The electrical aura around Pikachu began to flicker and dim as the psychic grip tightened.
Ash watched, his eyes narrowed. He saw it. A tiny, almost imperceptible tremor in Alakazam's left hand. It was focusing immense power, but that focus came at a cost. It was a monolith of psychic force, yes, but even a monolith has a single point of stress. Pikachu, Ash said, his voice cutting through the roar of energy. Trust me. Let it go.
For any other trainer, the command would be insane. It was an order to surrender to the crushing force. But Pikachu, even in his agony, heard the unwavering certainty in his partner's voice. The electrical aura vanished. The resistance ceased. For a split second, Alakazam's psychic power, which had been pushing against an equal and opposite force, suddenly had nothing to push against. The sudden release created a feedback loop, a psychic whiplash. Alakazam's head jerked back, its eyes blinking in disorientation. The grip on Pikachu vanished. In that infinitesimal moment of weakness, Ash gave his final command. Iron Tail. The ground. Pikachu, now free and falling, didn't need to be told twice. He twisted in midair, his tail glowing with the hard sheen of polished steel. He didn't aim for Alakazam. He slammed his tail into the stone plateau directly beneath the floating Pokémon.
The attack wasn't meant to do damage. It was meant to create a shockwave. The stone splintered, and a high-frequency vibration shot through the rock. The real target wasn't Alakazam's body, but its mind. The sudden, jarring physical vibration from below was a discordant note in the pure mental symphony of its focus. It was like shouting in a library. The psychic Pokémon flinched, its concentration completely shattered. Now, Thunderbolt. Pikachu landed, coiled, and unleashed a massive bolt of lightning. It wasn't his most powerful, but it was his fastest. It struck the stunned Alakazam head-on, throwing the Psy Pokémon backward through the air. It landed in a heap, its spoons clattering against the rock. It was over.
The silence that descended upon the plateau was absolute. The battle had been a whirlwind of strategy, power, and intellect, and it had ended with a sudden, shocking finality. Kale stared at his defeated Alakazam, then at Ash and the small yellow Pokémon standing before him. His face was a mask of disbelief. He had come with a hypothesis, with specific tests designed to measure legend. He had tested power, speed, and even the very nature of the bond he sought to understand. And at every turn, he had been dismantled. Ash Ketchum hadn't just defeated his Pokémon, he had defeated his entire methodology. Slowly, Kale recalled his Alakazam. He then looked at Ash, and the cold, analytical light in his eyes was gone, replaced by something akin to grudging reverence. The data was insufficient, Kale said, the words sounding like a profound, personal admission of failure. The bond, it is not a variable to be measured. It is the core of the equation itself. He gave a stiff, formal bow. Your reputation is not a legend, it is a fact. Without another word, he turned and walked away, his long strides carrying him quickly to the edge of the plateau and down the path on the other side. He disappeared into the mist as silently as he had appeared. Well, Serena said, breaking the silence, her voice a little shaky. That was intense. He didn't even seem upset about losing. He wasn't here to win, Brock said, his eyes on the path Kale had taken. That was an assessment. A very, very thorough one. Everything he did, every Pokémon he chose, was a specific question. Ash just gave him answers he wasn't expecting. Ash didn't reply. He walked over to Pikachu and knelt, gently checking him over. You okay, buddy? Pikachu chirped and nuzzled his trainer's hand, leaning into the familiar, comforting touch. The sparks were gone, replaced by a soft, warm glow.
As Ash stood up, his eyes scanned the ground where Kale had been standing. Something was there, something small and dark that didn't belong to the gray, windswept stone of the mountain. He walked over and knelt, picking it up.
It was a shard of what looked like polished black rock, perhaps obsidian, cool to the touch.
It was about the size of his thumb, triangular in shape, with edges that were unnaturally sharp. As he turned it over in his gloved fingers, he saw that its surface was covered in faint, intricate etchings, lines and symbols that seemed to shift and writhe at the edge of his vision. He ran his thumb over them. For a fleeting instant, he felt a strange, low hum resonate from the object, a vibration that seemed to travel up his arm and settle deep in his chest. It wasn't threatening. It felt ancient and strangely familiar.
"What is that?" Serena asked, coming to stand beside him. "I think your opponent dropped something," Brock added, peering at the object.
Maybe, Ash said, his voice distant. But he didn't think so. The way Kale had stood on that exact spot, the finality of his departure, it didn't feel like an accident. It felt like a message. Or perhaps, another piece of the test. Later that evening, they made camp in a sheltered basin just below the summit. The wind was a low moan now, a far cry from its earlier fury. A crackling fire pushed back the encroaching darkness, its warm light dancing on the faces of the three friends and the Pokémon who sat with them. The aroma of Brock's hearty stew filled the air, a comforting, familiar scent in the vast, wild emptiness of the mountains.
"He never once showed any emotion," Serena said, stirring the stew with a ladle. "It was like battling a machine. I've never seen a trainer so detached." "He was a zealot of some kind," Brock mused, staring into the flames. "Dedicated to a purpose beyond simply winning. People like that, they're either part of a military unit or a cult. Given the lack of a uniform, I'm leaning towards the latter." He looked at Ash. "You have to be careful. A trainer with your record becomes a target. Some want the glory of being the first to beat you. Others might want something else entirely."
Ash was quiet, sitting on a log with Pikachu dozing in his lap. He held the strange, dark shard in his hand, turning it over and over. The firelight seemed to catch in the etched grooves, making them glow with a faint, internal luminescence, like embers dying in a forge. He could still feel that residual hum, a quiet thrumming that seemed to sync with his own pulse.
He thought back to the battle. To Kale's words. "The bond can be measured. The bond can be broken." It wasn't the challenge of a rival. It was the clinical statement of an inquisitor. Kale wasn't just a trainer. He was a scientist, and the battle had been his experiment. He belonged to an organization, one with resources, discipline, and a deep, unnerving interest in the fundamental nature of the connection between humans and Pokémon. He looked up from the artifact, his gaze sweeping past the warm circle of the fire and into the immense, star-dusted darkness that pressed in on all sides. The victory on the plateau felt hollow now, not an end but a beginning. It was the opening move in a game he didn't yet understand, against an opponent who lurked in the shadows. He had been measured, weighed, and found to be something unexpected. And now, somewhere out there in the world, Kale was delivering his report. The unbeaten trainer was more than they had anticipated. And the Order of the Unseen would have to adjust its calculations. Ash closed his hand around the cool, smooth stone of the artifact. A challenge worthy of his reputation, Kale had said. He was beginning to think he had finally found one.
Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. Whispers in the Metropolis.
Luminance City did not rise from the earth so much as it descended from the sky. It was a city of glass and light, of gleaming spires that pierced the clouds and sky bridges that hummed with the silent, efficient passage of magnetic trams. The air, filtered and clean, tasted of manufactured perfection. After the raw, untamed wilderness of the mountains, stepping into Luminance was like stepping into a different world, one where nature was a curated guest in a kingdom of human ingenuity. Holographic advertisements, shimmering with impossible colors, danced in the air, showcasing everything from the latest Poketech to the upcoming Grand Showcase, the very reason for their visit. "I think I've forgotten how to walk on a surface that doesn't try to trip me," Serena said, her eyes wide as she took in the dazzling urban landscape. She practically vibrated with an infectious energy, a stark contrast to her leg-weary complaints on the mountain trail. Here, in the heart of fashion, performance, and art, she was in her element. Her steps were lighter, her gaze sharper, her entire being attuned to the creative pulse of the city. "Just be glad the rocks here are polished marble and not trying to start an avalanche," Brock replied, adjusting his glasses as he looked up at a skyscraper whose peak was lost in the afternoon sun, "though I'm not sure which is more likely to fall on you." Ash remained quiet, his senses on high alert. The city was a symphony of new sounds and sensations, a stark contrast to the elemental clarity of the mountains. The low hum of the power grid, the distant chime of a tram, the murmur of 1,000 conversations. It was a complex, layered environment.
Pikachu, perched on his shoulder, mirrored his master's vigilance, his nose twitching, cataloging the unfamiliar scents of street food vendors, perfume, and ionized air. Ash's hand drifted to the pocket where he kept the obsidian shard. Even through the fabric, he could feel its cool, steady presence, an anchor of ancient mystery in this world of manufactured futures.
Their destination was the Celestial Hall, a marvel of architectural design that looked less like a building and more like a massive, crystalline flower in bloom. Its iridescent panels shifted in color with the changing light, and it was here that Serena would compete in one of the most prestigious Pokémon showcases of the year. As they drew closer, the energy intensified. Aspiring performers and their Pokémon thronged the entrance, a vibrant kaleidoscope of costumes and colors. The air buzzed with nervous excitement, last-minute rehearsals, and the palpable thrum of dreams on the verge of being realized or shattered. Inside, the hall was even more breathtaking. The main stage was a marvel of holographic technology, capable of generating any environment from a tranquil forest to a blazing volcano at a moment's notice. Technicians bustled about, their faces illuminated by the glow of datapads, their voices a calm, professional murmur as they ran final systems checks. They found their assigned preparation suite, a comfortable room with mirrors, costume racks, and a space for Serena's Pokémon to warm up. Braixen was already practicing her twirls, the fiery twig in her tail leaving elegant trails of light in the air. Pancham, ever the little showman, was striking poses in front of a mirror, adjusting the angle of his sunglasses with a critical eye. "Okay, team," Serena said, her voice bright with determination. She clapped her hands together, drawing their attention. "We've practiced this 100 times. We know the routine inside and out, but today isn't about just getting the moves right. It's about showing them our heart. It's about that connection, that spark that makes us, us." Braixen chirped in agreement, spinning her twig like a baton. Pancham gave a confident grunt and tipped his shades. The bond between them was a tangible thing, a warm, resonant energy that filled the room. Ash watched them, a genuine smile on his face. This was Serena's battlefield, and her strategy was woven from grace, trust, and a joy that was impossible to fake. As Serena began her final preparations, Ash and Brock decided to watch some of the preliminary rounds from the public viewing area. The stands were packed, a sea of faces illuminated by the spectacular light show on stage. The first few performers were good, their routines polished and their Pokémon well trained. But Ash felt a subtle, nagging sense of unease. Something was off. It was in the small things, the details that 99% of the audience would never notice. A Vivian, meant to release a cloud of stunning sleep powder, did so a half-second too late, breaking the musical timing. A Furfrou, mid-leap in a perfectly choreographed routine, suddenly hesitated, its paws landing awkwardly and spoiling the flow. The performer, a young woman with a look of utter confusion, tried to cover for the mistake, but the magic of the moment was broken. "Tough crowd," Brock commented, leaning forward. "The judges are being particularly harsh today. That last routine seemed nearly flawless." "It wasn't the judges," Ash said, his voice low, his eyes narrowed on the stage. "It was the Pokémon. They're hesitating." Brock looked at him, intrigued. "Stage fright? It happens." "Not like this," Ash countered. "It's like they're getting a command and for a split second, they don't understand it. A flicker of static in the connection." He saw it again in the next performance. A trainer and his Machoke were executing a powerful, rhythmic dance. For a moment, they were in perfect sync, a display of muscle and grace. Then, in the middle of a complex lift, the Machoke's grip seemed to loosen for just an instant. The performer stumbled, catching herself before she fell, but the damage was done. The Machoke looked down at its own hands, a look of profound confusion on its face, as if it had been betrayed by its own body. A cold knot formed in Ash's stomach. This wasn't random error. It was a pattern. He excused himself, telling Brock he needed to stretch his legs, but his path was anything but aimless. He moved through the crowded corridors, away from the glitz of the main hall and into the functional, sterile backstage areas. He let his senses guide him, pushing past the noise and the lights, trying to pinpoint the source of the discord he felt. He found himself in a technician's corridor, a maze of humming conduits and blinking server racks that formed the technological nervous system of the building. The air here was cool, and the low-frequency hum of the building's power was more pronounced. He closed his eyes for a moment, focusing, trying to isolate the wrong note in the symphony. And then he felt it. A faint, almost subliminal pulse, completely out of sync with the building's own rhythm. It was a whisper of energy that felt wrong. It was invasive, irritating, like a fly buzzing just at the edge of hearing.
He followed the sensation down the corridor to a large junction box marked with a high-voltage warning. Affixed to the side of the box, almost perfectly camouflaged against the gray metal, was a small, flat device that was clearly not part of the hull's standard equipment. It was matte black, with no lights or markings, save for a single, intricate symbol etched into its surface.
It was the symbol of the Order of the Unseen. His blood ran cold. This was Kale's organization. But this wasn't a direct challenge. It was something far more insidious. Sabotage. A quiet, invisible attack aimed not at a trainer, but at the very essence of what this festival was celebrating. They were trying to sever the bonds. He didn't touch the device. He knew better. An organization this sophisticated would surely have countermeasures. Instead, he pulled out his Pokédex and discreetly took several high-resolution photos from multiple angles before melting back into the backstage shadows. He found Brock in the cafeteria, grabbing a drink. Ash quickly and quietly explained what he'd found, showing him the pictures on his Pokédex.
Brock's friendly demeanor vanished, replaced by the sharp focus of a seasoned academic.
He zoomed in on the image, his brow furrowed in concentration. That's not standard tech. The design is unfamiliar. But look at the energy signature my Pokédex is picking up, even from the photo. It's emitting a low-frequency psychic wave. Incredibly subtle. Most Pokémon would barely register it consciously, but it would feel like, well, like static. A constant, low-level annoyance designed to disrupt mental focus and communication. So when a performer sends a command, a feeling, to their Pokémon, Ash began. The signal gets muddied, Brock finished, his expression grim. The Pokémon hesitates, unsure of what it's being told. For a complex, perfectly timed performance, that split second of doubt is catastrophic. It makes it look like the performer or the Pokémon is making a mistake, but the real fault lies with a third party. It's diabolical. They're not just sabotaging the event. They're attacking the very confidence between a trainer and their Pokémon. A new, chilling thought struck Ash. Serena. They rushed back to the preparation suite. They found her sitting on a bench, her head in her hands. Braixen and Pancham were sitting opposite her, looking on with worried expressions. "What's wrong?" Ash asked, his voice gentle. Serena looked up, and her eyes, usually so bright and confident, were clouded with doubt.
"I don't know," she said, her voice small and tight. "We were just running through the finale, and I couldn't get the timing right." Braixen was early with her flamethrower, and Pancham missed his cue for the stone edge pillars. It felt like they weren't listening. She looked at her partners, a flicker of pain in her expression. "Or maybe I'm the one who's off. Maybe I'm just not ready for this." Braixen let out a soft, distressed cry and took a step toward her, but then hesitated, a familiar, uncertain flicker in her eyes. The psychic static was affecting them, too. Ash knelt in front of Serena, taking her hands in his. They were cold. "Listen to me," he said, his voice firm but kind, drawing her gaze and holding it. "It's not you. And it's not them." He quickly explained what he and Brock had discovered. He didn't soften the details. He knew she was strong enough to hear the truth. He told her about the device, the psychic frequency, and the symbol of the Order. Relief washed over her face, but it was quickly replaced by a flare of anger. "They're trying to ruin this? For everyone? Why?" "I don't know," Ash admitted. "But we're not going to let them. You and I, and Brock, and our Pokémon, our bonds are stronger than some cheap trick with a machine." He squeezed her hands. "When you go out on that stage, you can't rely on just the routine. You have to feel it. Trust them. Trust yourself. Let your heart be louder than the static. Can you do that?" Serena looked from Ash's determined face to her two Pokémon partners. She saw their unwavering loyalty, their worry for her. The doubt that had been planted in her heart began to wither under the light of that certainty. She took a deep breath, her spine straightening. The performer was back. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I can." While Serena centered herself, Ash and Brock formulated a plan. The showcase was a live, televised event. They couldn't just run in and rip the device off the wall. It could trigger an alarm, cause a panic,
or even have a more dangerous secondary effect. They had to disable it quietly, during the performance. The device is drawing power directly from the junction box, Brock said, studying the schematics of the hull on his datapad. If we could cause a minor, temporary power surge to that specific circuit, it might be enough to overload the device's delicate internal components without affecting the rest of the hull's systems. A surge, Ash mused. Pikachu could do that. It's risky, Brock warned. Too much power, and you blow the whole grid for this sector. The entire show goes dark. Too little, and you just give the device a little extra juice. You'd need a perfectly controlled, precise electrical charge. Ash looked at Pikachu, who was watching him intently, having understood every word. We can do it. There was no question in his voice. It was a statement of fact. The time for Serena's performance arrived. As she walked towards the stage, her costume shimmering under the lights, Ash gave her a final, reassuring nod. She smiled back, a genuine, dazzling smile filled with renewed confidence. As the announcer called her name to a roar of applause, Ash and Pikachu slipped away, heading back to the technician's corridor. Brock stayed in the wings, his datapad linked to the hull's power grid, ready to monitor the energy fluctuations. The corridor was deserted. Ash and Pikachu stood before the junction box, the faint, insidious hum of the hidden device a palpable presence in the air. Through the corridor's speaker system, they could hear the opening bars of Serena's music, a soaring, beautiful melody. The operation had to be timed perfectly. On stage, Serena began her performance. She moved with a fluid, captivating grace, her smile never wavering. Braixen and Pancham mirrored her movements, a perfect extension of her will. But Ash, watching on a small monitor in the corridor, could see the strain. He could see the infinitesimal moments of hesitation that the audience would miss, the tiny signs of the psychic interference they were fighting through with sheer force of will. Okay, Brock, Ash whispered into his wristcom, we're in position. I've isolated the circuit. Brock's voice came back, tense and low. You'll have a 30-second window when the stage lighting shifts for the finale. It'll cause a natural power dip that should mask your surge. I'll give you the signal. Ash looked at Pikachu. Just a small one, buddy. Like we practiced. A controlled pulse. You feel that hum from the box? Aim for that. Pikachu nodded, his cheeks beginning to spark with carefully controlled energy. On the monitor, Serena was building towards her climax. She signaled Braixen, who unleashed a spectacular spiral of fire from her twig. Get ready, Ash. The power dip is coming in 5, 4. Pikachu gathered the electricity, containing it in a small, dense ball at the tip of his tail. 3, 2, on stage, Serena threw a Poké Puff into the air. Pancham leapt, somersaulting, and prepared to unleash the stone edge that would shatter it into a shower of sparkling glitter. But for a split second, he faltered, the psychic static threatening to break his concentration at the most critical moment. Serena's eyes widened, but she didn't panic. She poured all of her trust, all of her belief, into a single, silent command to her partner. Now, Ash, Pikachu, now. Pikachu whipped his tail around and jabbed it against the junction box. He released the stored energy not as a wild bolt, but as a precise, surgical shock, an electro ball delivered at point-blank range. The metal box sparked violently. The lights in the corridor flickered for a single, heart-stopping second. A thin wisp of acrid smoke curled from the hidden device, and then the invasive, psychic hum that had been pressing in on Ash's senses vanished. The static was gone. On stage, in that exact same instant, Pancham's focus returned, sharp and clear. He unleashed a perfectly formed stone edge that struck the Poké Puff, exploding it into a glittering cloud that rained down on Serena and Braixen as they struck their final, triumphant pose. The connection was pure again. The crowd erupted into a deafening roar of approval. The performance had been more than perfect. It had been a story of struggle and triumph, a testament to a bond that had been tested and had emerged stronger than ever. Back in the corridor, a figure stepped out from the shadows at the far end. He was a man, thin and nondescript, dressed in the gray uniform of a hull technician. But his eyes, cold and sharp, were fixed on Ash. He held a small, smoking remote in his hand. He had been waiting to detonate the device if it was discovered. Impressive, the man, Silas, said, his voice a dry whisper. You not only detected my work, you dismantled it without alerting the entire facility. The Grand Master will be most interested in this new data. He wasn't reaching for a Pokeball. This was not a challenger like Kale. He was an operative, an infiltrator. His battle was fought in the shadows, with whispers and sabotage. "Who are you?" Ash demanded, Pikachu moving to his side, cheeks sparking with genuine threat this time. "We are the surgeons who will cure the disease of this world's chaotic heart," Silas said, his voice filled with a calm, unnerving fanaticism. He took a slow step backward, melting back into the shadows. "And you, Ash Ketchum, are a most fascinating symptom." He pressed a button on the remote. A section of the wall beside him hissed open, revealing a hidden maintenance tunnel. Before Ash could make a move, Silas had slipped inside, and the panel slid shut, leaving no trace it had ever been there. He was gone. Later, after Serena had been triumphantly crowned the winner of the showcase, the four of them sat in the now quiet preparation suite. Serena's new ribbon glittered on the table beside the obsidian shard. "They're not just strong," Serena said, her voice a mixture of awe and fear. "They're smart. They're everywhere." That man was disguised as a technician. He could have been anyone. "And their methods are diverse," Brock added, looking at the shard. "A direct challenge from Kale, and now this subtle, insidious attack. They're testing you, Ash. Probing your abilities from every conceivable angle. Not just your battle prowess, but your senses, your intuition, your ability to handle threats outside of a formal match." That night, sleep did not come easily to Ash. He lay on his bed in their hotel room, the obsidian shard resting on the nightstand beside him. As he drifted off, the faint, rhythmic pulse he always felt from the stone seemed to grow stronger, syncing with his heartbeat until the two were one. And then, the visions came. He was no longer in Luminance City. He stood on a high balcony overlooking a city of white stone and lush, hanging gardens. The architecture was ancient but impossibly advanced, built in harmony with the natural world. People and Pokémon moved together through the sun-drenched streets, their interactions seamless, filled with an easy, unspoken understanding. There was a profound sense of peace, of a world in perfect balance. He felt a deep, instinctual connection to this place, a sense of belonging that resonated in his very soul. Then, a shadow fell. It started at the edge of the city, a creeping darkness that seemed to drain the color and life from everything it touched. The joyful sounds of the city were replaced by a growing, unnerving silence. The people and Pokémon it consumed did not cry out or flee. They simply stopped, their expressions becoming blank, their movements mechanical, their vibrant bonds of emotion and individuality erased. They had become puppets, cogs in a silent, orderly machine. He saw a figure, standing on a tower at the city's heart, silhouetted against the encroaching void. The figure raised a hand, and a Pokémon of immense power, a being of pure psychic light, appeared beside them. Together, they fought back against the silent, consuming darkness. Ash awoke with a gasp, his heart pounding. The images from the dream were burned into his mind. The beautiful, harmonious city. The silent, world-ending threat. It wasn't just a dream. It was a memory. A warning. He looked at the obsidian shard, which now seemed to glow with a soft, internal light in the pre-dawn darkness. He was beginning to understand. The Order of the Unseen, with their talk of curing the world's chaotic heart, did not see the shadow as a threat. They saw it as the cure. And they believed that he, the Master of Bonds, was the key to unleashing it. The whispers in the metropolis had faded, but a much louder, more terrifying silence loomed on the horizon. His journey was no longer just about becoming a Pokémon master. It was about preventing a future where the very things he fought for, love, friendship, individuality, the chaotic, beautiful bonds between humans and Pokémon, were erased from existence. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3 The Guardian of the Sunken Temple. The dream clung to Ash like the mountain mist, a persistent, chilling memory that the bright, tropical sun of the Hoenn region could not quite burn away. The silent city, the creeping void, it was a vision he couldn't shake. The obsidian shard, now worn on a simple cord around his neck, felt heavier than its size suggested, a constant reminder of the unseen war they had stumbled into. It was no longer enough to travel and train. They needed answers. The Order of the Unseen had revealed their methods, but their ultimate goal remained shrouded in a fanatical ideology of forced peace. A lead came from an unexpected, yet welcome, source. Misty, the formidable gym leader of Cerulean City, had sent a message. It wasn't her usual fiery challenge or sarcastic greeting. It was a request for consultation, clipped and professional. She was in Hoenn, investigating a series of bizarre oceanic phenomena near Sutopolis City. Unpredictable, powerful currents were appearing where none should exist, and local water-type Pokémon were behaving erratically, displaying signs of confusion and distress. It was a pattern chillingly similar to the psychic static in Luminance City, but on a vast, environmental scale. It was a thread, and Ash knew they had to pull it. They met her at a small, sun-bleached port town an hour's boat ride from the mainland. The air was thick with the scent of salt and drying nets. Misty stood on the pier, her fiery orange hair a vibrant splash of color against the azure sea. She wasn't in her usual gym attire but in practical dive gear, her expression serious. At her side, a Starmie floated silently above the weathered wood, its central gem glowing with a steady, ruby light. "Took you long enough," she said, though the familiar barb was softened by a genuine smile as she saw them. "I was beginning to think you'd gotten lost in a shopping mall." Her gaze fell on Serena, and the two exchanged a look of mutual respect. They were vastly different people, but they were bound by their shared affection and concern for Ash. "Good to see you too, Misty," Ash replied, his own smile easy and warm. "Brock said you were onto something." The pleasantries were brief. Misty was all business, leading them to a small research outpost she had commandeered. A large, holographic map of the local seabed dominated the room, swirling with complex data overlays of current patterns and energy readings. The local authorities wrote it off as a temporary seismic anomaly, Misty explained, pointing to a deep trench on the map that glowed with an angry red light. "But I've been diving the area for a week. This isn't natural. The currents are too focused, too intentional. They're acting like a barrier. And the energy readings are off the charts. It's a mix of psychic and draconic energy, which makes no sense in this geological formation." Brock leaned in, his scientific curiosity piqued. He interfaced his own datapad with her system, his fingers flying across the screen. "Incredible. The psychic frequency is a much higher amplitude than the device in Luminance, but it's the same signature. It's being broadcast, but also contained. Like they're using the currents to shape and focus the psychic energy into a specific area." "My Gyarados almost went into a blind rage when I got too close," Misty added, her voice tight. "My Starmie could barely maintain its psychic link with me. Whatever's down there, they're either trying to break into it or trap something within it." "They're not trying to break in," Ash said quietly, his hand instinctively going to the shard at his neck. "They're already there." There was no more time for debate. They needed to see for themselves. With Misty's expertise and gear, the descent was swift. Ash's Greninja, a shadow in the deep, moved with silent, fluid grace, while Misty's Starmie acted as their beacon, its light cutting through the descending gloom. The world transformed from sunlit turquoise to a deep, mysterious sapphire, and then to an inky, crushing black. The pressure was immense, a constant, heavy presence that reminded them of their fragility in this alien environment. As they neared the coordinates, they saw it. Two sleek, black submarines, bearing the now familiar symbol of the Order, were anchored to the trench wall. They were silent, but powerful laser drills were working relentlessly on a section of the rock face, the beams of concentrated light looking like ghostly lances in the dark water. The Order was using brute force, a testament to their resources and their impatience. "Amateurs," Misty's voice crackled through their comms. "Trying to force their way through will just trigger the temple's defenses. These currents aren't just a barrier, they're part of a lock." "Can we get past them?" Serena asked, her voice steady despite the daunting sight. "We don't go through," Ash replied, his mind already piecing together the puzzle. He watched the way the artificial currents, generated by emitters on the submarines, interacted with the natural flow of the trench. He saw a pattern, a rhythm. "We go with it. Misty, can Starmie create a counterpulse to the emitters? Just for a second. Create a gap in their artificial current." "I can do better than that," Misty shot back. "Starmie, Power Gem." The Pokemon's core flashed, unleashing a volley of razor-sharp energy gems. They didn't strike the submarines but the cliff face above them. The targeted rockfall, minor but precise, forced the submarines to momentarily retract their drills and reinforce their energy shields. In that instant, the artificial current faltered. "Greninja, Water Shuriken," Ash commanded. Greninja formed a spinning star of compressed water and hurled it, not at the submarines, but into the natural vortex Misty had identified. The shuriken acted like a key, its spin syncing with the vortex's own and briefly stabilizing it, creating a narrow, tunnel-like opening. Now, Ash yelled. They urged their Pokémon forward, diving into the swirling tunnel of water. For a terrifying moment, they were caught in a maelstrom, but then, just as quickly, they were through, emerging into a pocket of calm, still water on the other side. Before them, hidden from the Order's direct view, was a massive, ornate archway carved into the rock, glowing with a soft, internal bioluminescence. The true entrance. They had outmaneuvered them. The interior of the temple was a place of breathtaking, solemn beauty. Vast, flooded chambers were connected by arching corridors, all carved from a strange, pearlescent stone that seemed to drink in the light from their Pokémon. Entire ecosystems of glowing coral and strange, deep-sea plants thrived, casting the whole place in an ethereal blue and green glow. The water was unnaturally clear and still, and the silence was profound, broken only by the sound of their own breathing. It felt sacred, ancient, and profoundly peaceful. But the peace was a lie. As they moved deeper, they found signs of the Order's presence. Discarded tools, temporary energy beacons, and the faint, but persistent, hum of that now familiar psychic static. The temple was a labyrinth, a test for any who entered. One chamber required them to use their Pokémon to activate a series of pressure plates in a sequence depicted by constellations on the ceiling. Another was a long corridor filled with powerful, shifting currents that had to be navigated like a deadly dance. It was a symphony of teamwork. Brock's sharp mind deciphered the ancient glyphs that offered clues. Misty's innate understanding of water predicted the traps. Serena's keen performer's eye caught subtle visual details others missed. And Ash, with his unshakable intuition, saw the path through it all, directing them with a calm, decisive authority. Their progress was halted in a large, spherical chamber. They were not alone. A squad of Order agents, clad in sleek, black dive suits that allowed for silent movement, emerged from the shadows of the surrounding archways. They moved with the disciplined precision of a military unit. Leading them was a tall woman, her face obscured by a polarized helmet. Her movements were economical and sharp, and the Dragalge and Klawitzer that materialized at her side were specimens of raw, intimidating power. "You are persistent," the commander's voice, filtered through her helmet's calm, was cold and clipped. "But your interference ends here. This temple serves a purpose you cannot comprehend." "We comprehend that you're defiling a sacred place," Misty retorted, her Gyarados appearing beside her with a silent, menacing roar that sent powerful vibrations through the water. The battle was immediate and chaotic. The chamber became a maelstrom of clashing energy. The Order's Pokémon were chosen for this environment. Klawitzer's Aurasphere and Dragon Pulse attacks were devastatingly fast underwater, and Dragalge's toxic sludge created venomous clouds in the water, restricting movement. It was a test of three-dimensional warfare. Ash and Misty fought back to back, a seamless fusion of tactical genius and elemental power. Greninja was a phantom, using the temple's pillars for cover, his water shurikens intercepting attacks with impossible precision. Misty's Gyarados was a titan, its hyper beam carving through the water like a comet, forcing the Order to scatter. Brock's Crobat used supersonic waves to disorient their opponents, while Serena's Braixen, surprisingly effective underwater, used her psychic abilities to create protective barriers and deflect toxic attacks. They were winning, pushing the Order back, but the commander was unfazed. "You fight with passion. A chaotic, inefficient variable," she stated, as if observing a scientific curiosity. "It is the very thing we seek to correct." She gave a curt signal, and her forces, rather than pressing the attack, performed a swift, tactical withdrawal, vanishing into one of the far corridors. It wasn't a retreat, it was a redirection. "They're falling back to the temple's heart," Ash realized. "They were just trying to delay us." They pushed onward, the sense of urgency now a palpable weight. They finally emerged from a long, ascending tunnel into a place that defied all logic. It was a vast, air-filled cavern deep beneath the ocean floor, the water held back by some unseen, ancient force field. The air was cool and smelled of ozone and damp stone. In the center of the cavern, on a massive, glyph-covered altar, a creature of breathtaking beauty and power was sleeping. It was a Lugia. Its silver-white skin seemed to glow, and its massive wings were folded at its sides. Even in slumber, it radiated an aura of immense psychic power and profound peace. This was the source of the temple's energy. By the gods, Brock whispered, his voice filled with reverence. It's the guardian of the seas. But their awe was cut short. The Order commander and her elite guard were already there, setting up a large, sophisticated device on a raised dais overlooking the altar. It was a far more powerful version of the psychic emitter from Luminance, its antenna glowing with a malevolent energy. Glyphs on the cavern walls, identical to the ones on Ash's shard, pulsed with a dim, pained light. Brock rushed to the nearest wall, his hands tracing the ancient text. This Lugia, it's a guardian. One of 3. Tasked with maintaining a seal on a psychic entity known as the Silent One. They're not trying to capture it, he said, a horrifying realization dawning on him. They're trying to corrupt it. To turn the guardian into the key. A warden should not fall in love with its prison. The commander's voice echoed in the vast cavern. She had removed her helmet, revealing a woman with severe, sharp features and eyes that held the cold certainty of a true believer. The Silent One will bring an end to all conflict, all pain, all chaotic emotion. It will bring true peace. Lugia will not be corrupted, it will be liberated. She activated the device. A high-frequency psychic wave, invisible but immensely powerful, washed over the cavern. The sleeping Lugia stirred, a low moan of pain and confusion echoing in their minds. The peaceful aura around it curdled, tainted by the invasive static. "We have to stop that machine," Serena yelled. The final battle began. The Order's remaining forces, a formidable team of Crawdont, Kingdra, and other powerful water types, formed a defensive perimeter around the device. But Ash and Misty were a tidal wave of controlled fury. "Gyarados, Hurricane," Misty commanded. The massive Pokémon created a swirling vortex of wind and water in the cavern, throwing the Order's defensive line into chaos. "Pikachu, Volt Tackle. Greninja, Shadow Sneak. Use the confusion," Ash directed. Pikachu became a bolt of living lightning, weaving through the hurricane's chaos. Greninja melted into the shadows of the storm, striking from unseen angles. It was a masterpiece of coordinated assault, but the commander was a formidable opponent. Her Dragalge's sludge wave attack poisoned a huge area of the battlefield, forcing them to stay mobile, while her Klowitzer's mega launcher boosted attacks were like artillery shells. The battle raged, a storm of elemental fury around the pained, thrashing form of the legendary Pokémon. The psychic device pulsed faster, its influence growing stronger. Lugia's eyes snapped open, glowing not with serene intelligence, but with a confused, directionless rage. It let out a psychic scream that buckled their knees, a pure, undiluted wave of agony. Defeating the Order's Pokémon wasn't enough. Ash knew it. They were just pawns. The real fight was for the heart of the Guardian. He looked at the obsidian shard around his neck. It was vibrating intensely, humming with a power that resonated with the temple's own. "Misty, Brock, Serena, I need you to buy me time," Ash shouted over the din. "Hold them off. I'm going to try to reach Lugia." "Are you insane?" Misty shot back, even as she directed her Starmie to intercept a Dragon Pulse. "It'll tear you apart." "Trust me." There was no time to argue. His friends, without another word of protest, redoubled their efforts, forming a desperate, protective wall between Ash and the Order. Ash took a deep breath, and with Pikachu on his shoulder, he started walking toward the altar, toward the raging, confused legendary Pokémon. He didn't run. He didn't shout. He held the shard in his hand, holding it up not as a weapon, but as an offering. He focused, pushing past the psychic static, past the rage and the pain. He didn't try to command Lugia or challenge it. He opened his own heart, projecting his feelings through the shard. His unwavering trust in Pikachu, his respect for Lugia's power, his fierce, protective love for his friends, and his deep, abiding belief in the beautiful, chaotic world the Order sought to erase. He offered not a command, but a connection. An anchor of clarity in a sea of manufactured noise. Lugia's psychic rage faltered. It turned its massive head, its glowing eyes fixing on the small human and his Pokémon approaching it. It felt his consciousness, not as an invasion, but as a calm, steady light in the storm. It felt the pure, unshakable bond he shared with the Pikachu on his shoulder, a bond stronger than any psychic frequency. "See?" the commander sneered. "The Master of Bonds reveals his purpose. He communes with it. He will unlock the path for us." But she was wrong. Ash wasn't unlocking anything. He was reinforcing the lock. Lugia, sensing the sincerity in Ash's heart and recognizing the invasive corruption of the device, made its choice. It reared its head back and unleashed a devastatingly powerful aeroblast. The beam of pure, concentrated energy didn't strike at the Order's Pokémon, but shot directly over Ash's head and slammed into the psychic emitter. The complex machine exploded in a shower of sparks and molten metal. The psychic static vanished. The silence that replaced it was clear, pure, and absolute. The commander stared at the wreckage of her machine, her cold composure finally shattering into disbelief. Impossible. The Warden refuses its key. Lugia's eyes, now clear and intelligent, fixed on the Order agents. There was no rage in its gaze now, only a cold, ancient power that promised utter annihilation. The commander, pragmatic even in defeat, knew the battle was lost. Fall back. Mission failed. Retreat. With practiced efficiency, the Order agents fired smoke bombs, and under the cover of the thick, disorienting cloud, they vanished back into the tunnels from which they came. The great cavern was silent again. Lugia lowered its head toward Ash, its psychic voice washing over them, not with words, but with feelings and images. It conveyed gratitude, a shared sense of duty, and a stark warning. It projected a single, clear image into Ash's mind. A map of the world, with two other locations glowing with a soft, silver light. One was in the heart of a massive, dormant volcano. The other was at the summit of a frozen, storm-shrouded mountain. The other guardians. With a final, lingering look of understanding, Lugia spread its wings. It launched itself into the air, phasing through the cavern's solid rock ceiling as if it were water, and disappeared into the ocean above. They stood in the silent, empty chamber, the immensity of their task settling upon them. They had saved one guardian, but they had only confirmed the Order's true, terrifying plan. This wasn't a series of random attacks. It was a coordinated campaign to corrupt the planet's most ancient protectors. As they surfaced, breaking through into the warm, sunlit waters of the Hoenn Sea, the world felt different. The sky seemed brighter, the colors more vibrant. They had faced a shadow that wished to bleed all the color from the world, and for now, they had pushed it back. But two more lights glowed on Ash's mental map, two more guardians standing between the world and a terrifying, silent peace. The whispers were over. The war had begun. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The champion's gambit. The world felt smaller, the stakes infinitely larger. Lugia's mental map was a constant presence in Ash's mind, 2 points of light burning against a backdrop of encroaching shadow. One light pulsed from the caldera of Mount Chimney in Hoenn, a place of volcanic fury. The other shone from the frozen peak of Mount Coronet in Sinnoh, a place of myth and creation. The Order would be moving, and Ash knew they had to get ahead of them. But charging headfirst into a confrontation with an organization that operated with such precision and power was reckless. They needed more information. They needed allies. The ally found them first. They were in a Pokémon Center in Rustboro City, planning their next move, when the message arrived. It wasn't sent to Ash's Pokédex or any of their personal devices. It was delivered by a black-suited League official who entered the center, scanned the room until his eyes landed on Ash, and approached their table with a brisk, no-nonsense stride. He placed a sleek, unmarked black data slate on the table. "A message for Ash Ketchum," the official said, his voice low and formal. "It is for your eyes only." With a curt nod, he turned and departed as silently as he had arrived. Ash picked up the slate. It was cool to the touch and devoid of any buttons or seams. As his fingers made contact, the screen shimmered to life, displaying a single, elegant sigil, the stylized crest of the Sinnoh Pokémon League. A moment later, a face appeared on the screen, a face known to anyone who followed the world of Pokémon battling. It was Cynthia, the champion of the Sinnoh region. Her expression was serene, but her gray eyes held a formidable intelligence and a gravity that commanded immediate attention. Ash Ketchum, her voice was calm and measured, yet it filled the noisy Pokémon Center with a sense of profound quiet. "Your recent activities in the Hoenn region, specifically near the Sea Mauville and the Sutopolis Trench, have intersected with an investigation of my own. I believe we have a mutual interest in a group calling themselves the Order of the Unseen." Ash's blood ran cold. She knew their name. "Your reputation precedes you," Cynthia continued, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching her lips. "But I am not a woman who deals in legends. I deal in facts, and I require a first-hand understanding of your capabilities." I am extending an invitation to a private conference at my villa near Celestic Town in Sinnoh. Be discreet. What we have to discuss is of the utmost importance to the stability of not just our regions, but the world. The slate contains a secure transport voucher. I will expect you in 2 days. The screen went dark. The data slate made a soft clicking sound and a small panel slid open, revealing a single, platinum-colored transport ticket. There was no debate. A champion did not make such a request lightly. This was the ally they needed. Misty, her duties as a gym leader calling, departed for Cerulean City, promising to discreetly mobilize a network of trusted water-type specialists should the need arise. The remaining trio, Ash, Serena, and Brock, used the voucher and began the journey to Sinnoh. Cynthia's villa was not a gaudy mansion of the rich and famous, but a place of quiet, elegant harmony. It was nestled in a secluded valley just outside the ancient, history-steeped Celestic Town, a modern architectural masterpiece of wood and glass that was built around a tranquil garden and a serene lake. It felt less like a house and more like a sanctuary. Cynthia greeted them personally at the door. In person, her presence was even more commanding than on screen. She was grace and power personified, her long blonde hair partially obscuring one eye, her expression a perfect balance of warmth and authority. She led them not to a formal meeting room, but to a comfortable, sunlit lounge overlooking the lake. "Thank you for coming on such short notice," she said, her voice as smooth as polished stone. "What I am about to share with you does not leave this room. The Pokémon League has been monitoring the activities of the Order of the Unseen for several years. They're an ancient cult, resurfacing now with unprecedented resources and coordination. Their doctrine revolves around the reawakening of an entity they call the Silent One, a being they believe will usher in an era of absolute order by purging the world of emotion, which they see as the root of all conflict." Her gaze fell on the obsidian shard hanging from Ash's neck. Their histories speak of a Master of Bonds, a trainer with an unparalleled connection to his Pokémon, who would be the catalyst for this reawakening. They believe that trainer is you. She confirmed everything they suspected and gave their fears a name. She spoke of the Order's cellular structure, their fanatical devotion, and their infiltration of various technological and corporate sectors, which explained their advanced equipment. Your encounters with their agents, Kale the strategist, Silas the saboteur, and the commander at the Undersea Temple, have provided us with more actionable intelligence in the last few weeks than we've gathered in years, Cynthia stated, her eyes locking onto Ash's. You have disrupted their operations and proven their predictions about your abilities correct, but you have also made yourself their single greatest target. You are no longer just a trainer they are testing. You are a key they are determined to possess. So what do we do? Serena asked, her voice tight with the gravity of the situation. We fight, Cynthia said simply. But I will not commit my resources, or risk alerting the other champions and escalating this into a panic, based on secondhand reports. I need to understand what I am allying myself with. I need to see it, to feel it. I need to know, without a shadow of a doubt, that you are who they think you are. She stood, her expression shifting from that of an intelligence briefer to that of a challenger. Ash Ketchum. I request a full 6-on-6 battle. No special rules, no time limits. A pure contest of strategy and will. Here, in my private arena. Your victory is not required. Your performance, however, is. The air crackled with a new tension. This was it. Not a test from an enemy, but an examination by a potential queen. This was the champion's gambit. I accept, Ash said, his voice unwavering. Cynthia's private battlefield was a masterpiece. A perfect grass field, bordered by the serene lake on one side and the dense Sinnoh forest on the other. There were no crowds, no announcers. The only spectators were Brock, Serena, and Cynthia's imposing Garchomp, who stood silently by her side, its gaze sharp and knowing. As the challenger, you have the first move, Cynthia said, taking her position on the far side of the field. Her calm was absolute, the placid surface of a deep ocean. Ash took a deep breath, centering himself. This was not like any battle he had fought before. This was a conversation with one of the masters. Every move would be a sentence, every switch a statement. Crocodile, I choose you. Ash threw the Pokeball, and the intimidation Pokémon appeared with a guttural roar. His dark glasses glinting in the sun, his powerful presence immediately cast a palpable aura of menace across the field. Cynthia smiled, a subtle, appreciative expression. A bold choice. an attempt to control the field's tempo from the outset. Very well. Spiritomb, let us begin. The forbidden Pokémon materialized, a swirling vortex of ghostly energy bound to a cracked stone keystone. It hovered eerily, its single eye glowing with malevolent glee. It had no weaknesses, a puzzle of a Pokémon that had stumped countless trainers. Crocodile, Stone Edge, Ash commanded. Crocodile slammed its claws into the earth, and pillars of sharp rock erupted from the ground, racing toward Spiritomb. Protect, Cynthia said, her voice barely a whisper. A shimmering green barrier appeared around Spiritomb, the stone pillars shattering harmlessly against it. Now, will-o-wisp. From behind the fading shield, a volley of sinister purple flames shot out, enveloping Crocodile. The big Pokémon roared in pain as the ghostly fire clung to him, inflicting a burn that would slowly sap his strength. Ash's expression didn't flicker. A classic burn and stall tactic against a physical attacker. Predictable, he was being tested. Return, Crocodile. He recalled his Pokémon before the burn could take a significant toll. Heracross, let's go. The single-horn Pokémon appeared, flexing his powerful arms, his massive horn pointed directly at the ghostly opponent. An excellent switch, Brock murmured from the sidelines. Heracross's Guts ability means its attack power will skyrocket from being burned. Ash is turning Cynthia's strategy against her. Now, Heracross, Megahorn, Ash ordered. Sucker Punch, Cynthia countered instantly. Heracross charged, his horn glowing with a blinding, iridescent light. But before he could reach his target, Spiritomb vanished and reappeared directly in his path, lashing out with a wave of dark energy. The priority move struck first, sending Heracross staggering back. She predicted it, Serena breathed. She knew Ash would go on the offensive. Don't let up. Megahorn again. Ash pressed. Heracross shook off the hit and charged once more. This time, he connected. The super-effective bug-type attack slammed into Spiritomb, sending it flying backward, but it held on. Destiny Bond, Cynthia said calmly, as Spiritomb righted itself in the air. A faint, ethereal glow briefly surrounded the ghostly Pokémon. Ash's eyes narrowed. It was a trap. If he knocked out Spiritomb now, Heracross would be taken down with it. Cynthia was willing to sacrifice her Pokémon to maintain an even playing field. She was ruthless.
Heracross, stand by, Ash said. He wouldn't fall for it. He would wait out the Destiny Bond's effect.
I think not, Cynthia said, a predatory gleam in her eyes. Spiritomb, hypnosis. A wave of psychic energy washed over the field. Heracross's charge faltered, his eyes growing heavy. He swayed for a moment and then collapsed, fast asleep. Now, Dream Eater. A ghostly apparition of Spiritomb flowed out of its keystone and descended on the sleeping Heracross, draining his energy. It was a devastating combination. Wake up, Heracross, Ash urged, but it was no use. After a second Dream Eater, his powerful Pokémon was down. Heracross is unable to battle, Brock announced quietly to the air. The opening exchange was over, and Cynthia had a 1-0 lead. She had dismantled him with prediction, status effects, and cunning traps. Ash recalled Heracross with a quiet word of thanks. He was not rattled. He was learning. Cynthia was a master of control. She dictated the flow of battle, forcing her opponents to play on her terms. The only way to win was to break her control, to introduce a factor she couldn't predict. Snorlax, it's your turn. The massive Pokémon appeared on the field with a ground-shaking thud, letting out a cavernous yawn. Cynthia raised an eyebrow, intrigued. An interesting choice, she mused. Spiritomb, continue with will-o-wisp. The purple flames shot out again, engulfing Snorlax, but the big Pokémon barely seemed to notice. Now, Snorlax. Rest, Ash commanded. Snorlax immediately curled up and fell fast asleep, a picture of blissful slumber. The burn status was instantly cured, and his health began to regenerate. He's using rest to absorb the status condition and heal, Serena realized. He's turned Snorlax into a wall she can't easily break down. A sound strategy, Cynthia acknowledged. But a sleeping Pokémon is a vulnerable one. Spiritomb, Dark Pulse. A wave of dark, pulsing rings shot across the field, striking the sleeping Snorlax. He flinched in his sleep but remained down. Now, Ash's play, Brock said, his eyes glued to the field. Snorlax has two moves he can use while asleep. Snore and Sleep Talk. Sleep Talk, Ash said. Snorlax's body glowed, and the random move generator of Sleep Talk kicked in. He shot to his feet, despite being asleep, and his fist became encased in ice. Ice Punch. The command came from Snorlax himself, a product of the random move. He charged forward, surprisingly fast, and slammed the super effective Ice Punch into Spiritomb. The ghostly Pokémon cried out and faded, its form dissipating. It was finally down. The score was even, but Snorlax was still asleep and vulnerable. Excellent adaptation, Cynthia said, recalling Spiritomb without a change in expression. You weathered the storm and found your opening. But now, you must face the storm itself. Melodic, take the stage. The beautiful sea serpent materialized in a shimmer of light, its long, elegant body coiled, its scales catching the sun like 1,000 jewels. It let out a serene, melodic cry. It was a picture of grace, but Ash knew it was a defensive titan. Snorlax was still fast asleep. Cynthia wouldn't miss this opportunity. Melodic, hydro pump. A colossal, high-pressure torrent of water erupted from Melodic's mouth, slamming into Snorlax with incredible force. The sleeping Pokémon was blasted off his feet, sliding back dozens of yards across the grass. He was tough, but he couldn't take that kind of punishment forever. Snorlax, hang in there, Sleep Talk, Ash urged. Again, Snorlax's body glowed. Body Slam. He roared in his sleep, heaving his massive frame into the air and crashing down toward Melodic. Dodge and use Ice Beam, Cynthia commanded coolly. Melodic moved with impossible grace, flowing to the side like water itself, easily avoiding the clumsy, sleeping attack. It then unleashed a beam of pure cold that struck Snorlax midair, encasing one of his massive arms in solid ice. Snorlax finally woke up. He roared, shaking his head, but he was injured, his health low from the sustained assault. Now, Snorlax, belly drum, Ash yelled, seizing the moment. It was a huge gamble. Snorlax struck his own belly with immense force, sacrificing half of his remaining health. But in return, his attack power was maximized to its absolute physical limit. He was now a glass cannon, a being of unimaginable power, but a single strong hit would take him down. A desperate, all-or-nothing gambit, Cynthia observed, her eyes sharp. I admire the courage, but it is reckless. Melodic, finish this with Hydro Pump. Don't give it the chance, Snorlax, Giga Impact. It was a race. The water began to gather in Melodic's mouth. Snorlax, glowing with a terrifying, golden aura, charged forward like a runaway comet. He was a blur of motion, a force of nature that tore up the very ground as he moved. He was faster. The Giga Impact hit Melodic before it could fire. The impact was apocalyptic. A shockwave of pure force exploded across the field, kicking up a mushroom cloud of dust and grass. The sound was a physical blow. Even from the sidelines, Brock and Serena had to shield their eyes. When the dust settled, Melodic was unconscious, blasted into the tree line at the edge of the field. Snorlax stood, panting, smoke rising from his body, the recoil from Giga Impact leaving him unable to move. But he was standing. Ash had taken the lead. Cynthia recalled Melodic, a flicker of something new in her eyes, not surprise, but profound respect. To push a defensive Pokémon into a contest of raw power, and win. Extraordinary. She reached for her next Pokéball. But a Pokémon that cannot move is a perfect target. Lucario, the stage is yours. Her aura Pokémon appeared, its posture calm and focused, its red eyes glowing with an inner power. It immediately sensed the flow of the battle, the energy of the field. Snorlax was a sitting duck. Ash knew it. He recalled him with thanks for a job well done. This was the flow of a master battle. Sacrifice and exchange, positioning and prediction. Charizard, I need you. Ash threw the ball high into the air. The fire dragon appeared with a deafening roar, his massive wings beating the air, his tail flame burning with the intensity of a small sun. His long-standing, fierce rivalry with Ash had tempered into an unbreakable bond of mutual respect. He was here to win. A classic powerhouse, Cynthia noted. Lucario, Aura Sphere. Lucario thrust its palms forward, launching a sphere of pure, unstoppable energy. Air Slash. Ash countered. Charizard beat his wings, sending blades of razor-sharp air to meet the sphere. They impacted midway, detonating in a flash of light. Dragon Dance, Cynthia commanded. Lucario began to move in a swift, flowing pattern, its body glowing with a red aura. Its speed and attack were rising. Cynthia was setting up for a sweep. "Don't let him set up," Ash yelled. Flamethrower. A torrent of fire roared across the field. Extreme speed, Cynthia's command was perfectly timed. Lucario vanished. It moved so fast it was invisible to the naked eye, easily evading the jet of fire and reappearing directly in front of the much larger Charizard. Close combat. In a blinding flurry of punches and kicks, Lucario unleashed a devastating barrage on Charizard, striking at his joints and chest. Charizard roared in pain, staggering back from the ferocity of the super-effective fighting-type assault. Lucario landed, its own defenses lowered from the move's recoil, but the damage was done. During the assault, as the raw power of the Aura Pokémon hammered his partner, a fleeting vision flashed through Ash's mind. It was the ancestor from his dream, facing not a Pokémon, but a swirling vortex of the silent, dark void. The ancestor wasn't attacking it head-on. He was guiding his own Pokémon, a majestic Arcanine, to move with the vortex, to redirect its terrible energy rather than meet it with force. Use their strength against them. The vision was gone in an instant, but the insight it provided was crystal clear. Charizard, seismic toss, Ash yelled. Charizard grabbed the smaller Lucario, ignoring the pain, and rocketed into the sky.
Lucario, use Aura Sphere at point-blank range. Cynthia ordered, seeing the danger. This was what Ash had been waiting for. As Lucario began to form the sphere of energy in Charizard's grasp, high above the field, Ash gave his true command. Now, Dragon Tail.
Charizard, instead of continuing the seismic toss, spun his body with incredible torque. His tail, glowing with draconic energy, slammed into Lucario. The blow did two things. First, it knocked the still-forming Aura Sphere off course, sending it harmlessly into the sky. Second, as a secondary effect of Dragon Tail, it forced Lucario back into its Pokeball against Cynthia's will. The battle screen on the sidelines pinged, and a random Pokémon from Cynthia's team was selected to come out. It was her Roserade. The bouquet Pokémon appeared in the spot Lucario had just vacated, looking utterly confused to be suddenly in the middle of the field. And directly above it, Charizard was still in the air. Flare Blitz. Ash roared, seizing the momentary chaos he had created. Engulfed in flames, Charizard descended like a meteor, slamming into the unprepared Roserade. The grass, poison type stood no chance. It was a one-hit knockout. Ash had not only saved Charizard from a devastating close combat follow-up, but he had also taken out a third one of Cynthia's Pokémon by using her own team's mechanics against her. It was a strategic masterstroke.
Brock was on his feet. Unbelievable. He baited the close combat, endured it to get in close, then used Dragon Tail not for the damage, but for its switching effect, creating a moment of chaos to get a favorable matchup and a free knockout. That's not just battling. That's art.
Cynthia was smiling now, a wide, genuine smile of pure exhilaration. To see a strategy that I have never even conceived of. Ash Ketchum, you are truly full of surprises. She recalled her Roserade. Very well. Let us cease the intricate dance and move to the grand finale. Togekiss, let's fly. The Jubilee Pokémon took to the air, its serene presence a stark contrast to Charizard's fiery ferocity. But Ash knew the danger of a well-trained Togekiss and its serene grace ability. The aerial battle was a dizzying display of speed and power. Togekiss's air slash, each one with a high chance of making Charizard flinch, was a constant threat. But Charizard, battle-hardened and fierce, endured, countering with powerful flamethrowers and dragon claws. It was a brutal, close-quarters dogfight that ended in a double knockout as Charizard's last Blast Burn attack connected at the same moment as Togekiss's final Sky attack. 4 Pokémon down on Cynthia's side, 3 on Ash's, he still had the lead. Cynthia took a deep breath, her smile fading into an expression of ultimate focus. It has been a very long time since I have been pushed this far. Thank you, Ash. Now, allow me to return the favor. Garchomp. Her ace appeared. The mock Pokémon let out a roar that shook the very trees. Its presence was overwhelming, an apex predator in its prime. This was Cynthia's partner, the Pokémon that had crushed countless challengers. Ash knew who to call. Pikachu, I choose you. The little yellow mouse leapt from his shoulder onto the field, looking impossibly small before the towering dragon. But there was no fear in his eyes, only a fierce, crackling determination. A bold and sentimental choice, Cynthia said, a hint of warning in her voice. But sentiment does not win battles at this level. Garchomp, Dragon Rush. Garchomp became a blue and red missile, cloaked in a draconic aura, tearing across the field. Pikachu, quick attack, let's get in close, Ash commanded. Pikachu shot forward, a blur of yellow, aiming to get under Garchomp's charge. But Cynthia's Garchomp was no brute. It was impossibly fast. It angled its descent, cutting Pikachu off. Now, Brick Break, Cynthia ordered. Garchomp's fin glowed with energy as it swiped at Pikachu. Iron Tail, block it, Ash yelled. Pikachu's tail hardened into steel, meeting the Brick Break in a shower of sparks. The force of the blow sent Pikachu flying, but he had blocked the attack. He landed on his feet, skidding to a halt. You can't win a power struggle, Cynthia stated. Garchomp, use your full strength. Giga Impact.
The same move that Snorlax had used, but now wielded by a pseudo-legendary dragon. Garchomp shrouded itself in golden energy and charged, an unstoppable force of nature. There was no dodging it.
Pikachu, Ash yelled. Face it head-on, Volt Tackle. The crowd on the sideline gasped. A head-on collision between two of the most powerful physical attacks in existence. Pikachu cloaked himself in a furious aura of high-voltage electricity and shot forward. The two comets, one gold, one electric yellow, collided in the center of the field. The explosion was blinding. A dome of pure energy erupted outwards, scorching the grass and sending a wave of superheated air across the valley. For a moment, everything was white light and deafening noise. When vision returned, both Pokémon were down. Garchomp, massive and powerful, was unconscious. And Lil Pikachu, impossibly, was also knocked out. A perfect tie. It was 5 knockouts to 4. Ash still had one Pokémon left. Cynthia had one left as well, the Lucario that had been forced out by Dragontail earlier. Lucario appeared back on the field, battered but still ready to fight. Ash looked at his last Pokeball. Crocodile, still nursing the burn from the beginning of the match.
Crocodile appeared, growling, the purple flecks of the will-o-wisp still flickering around him. He was at a disadvantage.
Your Crocodile is injured, Cynthia said, her voice soft. And Lucario's spirit is unbroken. This has been a magnificent battle, Ash. There is no shame in this outcome. She was offering him an honorable defeat. Ash looked at Crocodile. He saw the fire in the Pokemon's eyes, the unwillingness to quit. He smiled. Cynthia, he said, his voice ringing with a calm, unshakable confidence. This battle was over 2 moves ago. Cynthia frowned, confused. Crocodile, Ash said, his voice dropping into a low, commanding tone. Dig. Crocodile tunneled underground, vanishing from sight. A stalling tactic? Cynthia asked, puzzled. Lucario, be ready. Use Aura Sphere on the ground the moment it emerges. Lucario closed its eyes, sensing the vibrations in the earth, tracking Crocodile's movement. He's not stalling, Brock said, his eyes wide with sudden realization. Oh, you have got to be kidding me. He saw this coming. What is it? Serena asked. The field, Brock exclaimed. Look at the field. The Giga Impact Volt Tackle collision hadn't just knocked out the Pokémon, it had fundamentally altered the battlefield. The grass was scorched away, and the ground itself was fractured, destabilized, and littered with loose, superheated rock from the force of the blast. Now, Crocodile. Stone Edge, Ash commanded. Crocodile didn't emerge. Instead, a series of sharp, glowing pillars of rock erupted from the ground all around the confused Lucario. But they weren't the clean, perfect pillars from the start of the battle. They were jagged, unstable, and they tore through the already weakened ground, turning the entire area into a treacherous, crumbling mess. It's a trap, Cynthia realized, too late. Lucario, jump clear. But as Lucario tried to leap away, the ground beneath it gave way. It was a pitfall, created by Crocodile's underground rampage. Lucario stumbled, its leg momentarily caught. And in that instant, from a newly formed hole right behind the trapped Aura Pokémon, Crocodile burst from the ground. Earthquake, Ash said, his voice echoing with finality. Crocodile slammed its fists into the unstable earth. A massive shockwave radiated outwards. The super-effective, ground-shaking attack, amplified by the ruined terrain, was devastating. Lucario, unable to get its footing, was caught in the epicenter and thrown violently into the air before crashing down, unconscious. Silence. The battle was over. Against all odds, against one of the greatest champions in the world, Ash had won. He hadn't just won through power. He had won with foresight, using the catastrophic result of a previous exchange to set a trap for the final act. Cynthia stood motionless for a long moment, staring at her defeated Lucario. Then, she recalled her partner and began to applaud, a slow, deliberate clap that echoed in the quiet valley.
In all my years as champion, she said, her voice filled with genuine, unadulterated awe, no one has ever done that. No one has ever thought to weaponize the aftermath of an attack as a strategy in itself. I asked for a demonstration of your abilities. What you have given me is a masterpiece.
She walked across the ruined field and offered her hand. Ash took it, and the two masters shook, a new, powerful alliance forged in the crucible of an epic battle. The Order of the Unseen thinks you are the key to their plan, Cynthia said, her gray eyes burning with a new fire. After what I have seen today, I think they are right. You are the key. But you're not going to open the door for them. You are going to be the one that locks it for good. She looked towards the distant peak of Mount Coronet, its snowy summit just visible from her valley. And I, and the full resources of the Sinnoh League, will help you do it. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. The Festival of Bonds and Betrayal. Celestic Town was a place out of time. Nestled in the heart of Sinnoh, it was a town that breathed history, its paths worn smooth by the footsteps of generations who had lived in the shadow of the mighty Mount Coronet. Ancient, moss-covered stone archways stood beside humble wooden homes, and a gentle mist seemed to perpetually cling to the air, softening the edges of the world and lending everything a dreamlike quality. In the center of the town, a small, serene shrine dedicated to Dialga and Palkia served as a quiet reminder of the powers that had shaped the very land they stood upon. It was a town built on reverence, a place where the bond between humans and Pokémon was not just celebrated but considered a sacred text, written into the very fabric of their culture. Now, that quiet reverence had been transformed into joyous, vibrant life. The annual Festival of Unity was in full swing. Colorful banners depicting legendary Pokémon fluttered from every rooftop. The streets were filled with the tantalizing aromas of fried foods and sweet confections, and the air hummed with the cheerful sounds of music, laughter, and the happy calls of Pokémon. It was a celebration of connection, a living embodiment of everything the Order of the Unseen sought to erase. For Ash, Serena, and Brock, walking through the thronged streets with Cynthia as their guide, it was a moment of welcome respite. After the stark intensity of their battle, the champion had insisted they take a day to experience the festival, to use it as cover while she arranged for them to access the town's historical archives. The Celestic Town Historical Research Center is more than just a library, Cynthia explained, her voice a calm anchor in the sea of festive noise. She was dressed in more casual attire, yet she still moved with an effortless grace that parted the crowds before her. It holds some of the oldest records in Sinnoh, texts that predate the modern Pokémon League. If there are any truths to be found about the Silent One, they will be there. Is that where we're meeting your contact? Brock asked, his eyes alight with academic curiosity, already imagining the ancient lore contained within the center's walls. We are. Professor Carolina is the lead researcher and the curator of the center, Cynthia replied, a warmth entering her tone. She was my grandmother's dearest friend and has known me since I was a child. There is no one in Sinnoh who knows more about the region's myths, or who I would trust more with this. The research center was a beautiful, unassuming building of dark wood and frosted glass, built directly into the side of a gently sloping hill. It felt like a part of the landscape, a place of quiet contemplation amidst the festival's exuberance. Inside, the air smelled of old paper, polished wood, and dried herbs. Sunlight streamed through high windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air like tiny, golden sprites. Professor Carolina was waiting for them. She was a woman whose age was impossible to guess. Her hair was a cascade of pure white, but her eyes, the color of warm amber, sparkled with a youthful, vibrant intelligence. She had a kind, deeply lined face, and her smile was genuine and welcoming. She moved with a quiet, shuffling grace, her hands often clasped behind her back. "Cynthia, my dear girl," she said, her voice soft and melodic. She embraced the champion with a familiar, grandmotherly affection. "It has been too long. And you must be the trainers she spoke of." Her warm gaze fell upon Ash, Serena, and Brock. "It is an honor. Welcome to our humble repository of memories." There was an immediate sense of trust, a comforting aura of wisdom and kindness that emanated from the old professor. She listened intently as Cynthia, choosing her words with care, explained their need to research an obscure, ancient entity, a being of profound psychic power associated with a group that wished to disrupt the balance of the world. Professor Carolina's expression grew somber. "The old tales are filled with warnings," she murmured, her fingers tracing the spine of a heavy, leather-bound book on her desk. "Shadows that walk, voices that steal the will, a peace so absolute it is indistinguishable from death. The Silent One is a name I have seen, scribbled in the margins of crumbling scrolls, a footnote to a forgotten history." Her eyes lingered on the obsidian shard around Ash's neck. "May I?" she asked, her voice gentle. Ash nodded, allowing her to take the artifact in her delicate, papery hands. She held it with a reverence that surprised him, her thumb tracing the strange, shifting glyphs. "Fascinating," she whispered. "The craftsmanship is unlike any known culture from this region. It feels alive, as if it remembers the touch of its maker." She handed it back to him, her amber eyes filled with a deep, scholarly curiosity. "You carry a heavy burden, young man. A key to a history that wishes to repeat itself." Over the next several hours, Professor Carolina became their indispensable guide. She granted them access to the center's deepest archives, a climate-controlled vault filled with scrolls and tablets so ancient and fragile they could only be handled with specialized gloves. She translated cryptic passages, pointed out connections between disparate myths, and shared her encyclopedic knowledge with an infectious passion. She spoke with a fiery conviction about the sanctity of the bond between humans and Pokémon, calling it the spark of chaos that creates all beauty in the world. She was, in every conceivable way, the perfect ally. As evening began to fall, casting long shadows through the library's high windows, Cynthia was called away to handle a sensitive league matter. She promised to return within the hour. "You are in the best possible hands," she said with a reassuring smile toward the professor. Left with their research, a strange, nagging feeling began to prick at the back of Ash's mind. It was the same feeling he'd had in Luminance City, a subtle discordance beneath a surface of seeming perfection. He watched as Professor Carolina showed Serena a beautifully illustrated manuscript depicting the first Festival of Unity. Her explanation was detailed, her affection for the town's history palpable. But as she pointed to a specific passage, her sleeve hitched up, and for a fraction of a second, Ash saw a small, dark tattoo on the inside of her wrist. It was a complex, geometric symbol. The symbol of the Order of the Unseen. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Ash's breath caught in his throat. It was impossible. It had to be a coincidence, a similar design, anything but what he knew it was. He tried to push the thought away, to dismiss it as paranoia born from the constant tension. But he couldn't. He looked at this kind, brilliant, grandmotherly woman, who had embraced Cynthia, who spoke with such passion about the sanctity of bonds, and superimposed the image of Kale's cold eyes, Silas's fanatical whisper, the ruthless efficiency of the temple commander. They couldn't be part of the same whole. He needed to be sure. "Professor," he began, his voice carefully casual, "Cynthia mentioned that the center has a state-of-the-art security system. It must be a challenge to protect artifacts this valuable, especially during a crowded festival." Professor Carolina beamed with pride. "Oh, it is the finest system in the region. Designed it myself, in fact. We have psychic dampeners, weight sensors, spectral analyzers, every contingency is accounted for." She gestured to a holographic map of the facility on her desk. "For example, the main vault is protected by 3 separate energy grids. The only way to bypass it is to overload all 3 simultaneously from the master conduit in the sub-basement. But the conduit is behind a pressure-sealed door that only I have the code for. And the only blind spot in the entire camera network is this small maintenance corridor here." She pointed with a casual finger, "but it's a dead end, so it poses no threat. It is, if I may say so myself, a fortress." Her words were meant to be reassuring, but to Ash, they were a blueprint. A detailed, step-by-step guide on how to rob the place, delivered with a warm, trustworthy smile. The cold knot in his stomach tightened into a solid block of ice. He exchanged a look with Brock, who had also fallen silent. Brock's keen, analytical mind had caught the same thing Ash's intuition had. The professor wasn't just answering a question, she was providing an unsolicited, highly specific vulnerability assessment. The festival outside was reaching its climax. The soaring music of the grand performance and the rising cheers of the crowd could be heard even through the thick walls of the center. The fireworks were about to begin. The perfect distraction. "Serena, Brock," Ash said, his voice low and urgent, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the sudden storm in his chest. "We need to go. Now." He didn't need to explain. They saw the look in his eyes and understood immediately. As they turned to leave the archive, Professor Carolina's smile finally faded, replaced by an expression of quiet, profound disappointment. "So you see it," she said, her voice losing its melodic warmth, becoming as thin and dry as old parchment. "I had hoped your perceptions were limited to the battlefield. A pity." The kindly grandmother vanished, replaced by something ancient and weary, her amber eyes holding a sorrow so deep it was chilling. "I truly am sorry for this. I do so admire your bond with your Pokémon. It is a beautiful, vibrant thing. Like a fever. And like any fever, it must eventually be broken for the good of the patient." Before they could react, she pressed a hidden button on her desk. Heavy, steel shutters slammed down over the windows and doors, plunging the room into the dim, artificial light of the emergency lamps. They were trapped. "The artifacts in the Celestial Vault are not just historical curiosities," she explained, her voice echoing in the sudden, tomb-like silence. "They are psychic amplifiers. Relics from a time when the world was almost saved. They are necessary for the final preparations at Mount Coronet. My colleagues are retrieving them now. This was merely a delay." "Cynthia trusted you." Serena's voice was sharp with disbelief and anger. "Everyone trusts you." "Trust. Emotion. The very diseases I have spent a lifetime studying," the professor countered, her voice filled with a weary conviction. "I have read the histories of 1,000 wars. I have catalogued the pain of 1,000,000 pointless conflicts, all of them born from love, from pride, from fear, from hope. I have watched the world burn again and again in the name of these chaotic, inefficient feelings. The Silent One offers the only logical cure. A permanent end to suffering. Is that not a goal worth any price?" This was the heart of the enemy. Not a lust for power, but a twisted, desperate desire for peace, born from a profound and utter despair in humanity.
The sound of a distant, muffled explosion from deep within the building shook the floor. The heist was underway.
"We don't have time for this," Ash said, his focus absolute. "Pikachu, Thunderbolt," on the door controls. A powerful bolt of lightning erupted from Pikachu's cheeks, striking the panel by the door. It sparked violently and went dark, but the heavy steel door remained locked. A futile gesture, Professor Carolina sighed. "The system is shielded." Ash looked around the room, his eyes scanning, calculating. The shelves packed with priceless, fragile books. The heavy oak desk. The steel shutters. "Brock, tip that bookshelf. Serena, get ready." Brock, needing no further explanation, put his shoulder to a massive, floor-to-ceiling bookshelf. With a great heave, the ancient piece of furniture groaned and then crashed forward, slamming into the center of the room and kicking up a cloud of dust. It wasn't a random act of destruction, it was a distraction. As the professor's attention was drawn to the crashing shelf, Ash pointed to a small, grated air vent near the ceiling. "Pikachu, quick attack, up there. Greninja, I need you." Pikachu shot up the wall like a yellow rocket, landing on a high window ledge. Greninja materialized in a crouch beside him.
Water shuriken, on the hinges of the vent cover.
A spinning star of compressed water shot out, striking the vent's hinges with surgical precision. The metal cover clattered to the floor. "Let's go," Ash yelled, pulling himself up onto the desk and then the fallen bookshelf, a makeshift ramp to the high opening. Serena and Brock were right behind him. They scrambled into the narrow, dark air duct just as Professor Carolina's calm finally broke. "No, stop," she cried, her voice echoing with frustration from the room below. The duct was a tight squeeze, a maze of cold, dark metal. Ash led the way, guided by a faint humming of energy and the distant sounds of battle. They emerged into a vast, circular chamber, 2 stories high, lined with glass display cases. This was the main exhibition hall. Below them, a battle was raging. A team of 4 black-clad Order agents, moving with a silent, deadly grace, were fighting against the center's security team, which was being led by a furious Cynthia, her Garchomp a whirlwind of draconic fury. But the Order agents were masters of sabotage. They had deployed Pokémon like Weezing and Muck, filling the hall with thick, choking smoke and sticky sludge that hampered movement and visibility. They weren't trying to win. They were trying to control the space, to create a chaotic screen for their true objective. In the center of the room, 2 more agents were working on a massive, circular vault door, the entrance to the Celestial Vault. They had attached a complex device that was pulsing with energy, overloading the 3 grids just as the professor had described. Cynthia's been cut off. Brock yelled over the din. They're using the smoke to isolate Garchomp. Ash saw it all in a heartbeat. The vault door, sparks flying from its locking mechanism. Cynthia and Garchomp, bogged down by status effects and tactical positioning. The agents, working with cold, detached efficiency. We have to stop them at the source. Ash shouted. He leapt from the duct's opening, landing on the upper-level balcony. Greninja, Night Slash on those agents. Pikachu, Electro Ball on their device. The 2 attacks shot down from above. Greninja became a black phantom, his blades of dark energy forcing the agents at the vault to abandon their work and defend themselves. Pikachu's sphere of crackling electricity slammed into their machine, causing it to short-circuit with a deafening bang. The vault door, half open, groaned to a halt. They had stopped them. For now. Intruders. One of the agents yelled, pointing up at Ash. He released a Crobat, which shot towards the balcony with terrifying speed. Staraptor, I need you, brave bird. Ash called out, releasing his own aerial ace. The 2 bird Pokémon collided in a flurry of feathers and furious cries. The battle descended into a desperate, close-quarters brawl. Ash, Serena, and Brock joined Cynthia on the ground floor, their Pokémon fighting to push back the disciplined Order agents. It was a chaotic mess of smoke, sludge, and flashing attacks. In the heart of the chaos, Ash saw his chance. The vault door was still ajar. He could see the artifacts inside, resting on velvet pedestals, glowing with a soft, ethereal light. He had to secure them. Cover me, he yelled to Cynthia. With a nod, Cynthia directed her Garchomp to unleash a devastating dragon rush, forcing the agents to fall back and giving Ash a clear path. He slid through the narrow opening into the vault just as an Order agent, a lithe woman with a deadly-looking Mienshao, slipped in behind him. The heavy door hissed shut, plunging them into the soft, quiet glow of the artifacts. The sounds of battle outside were instantly muffled. The vault was a small, circular room. The artifacts were arranged on a central dais. There were 3 of them, a twisted, horn-like flute, a crystal lens that seemed to bend the light around it, and a perfectly smooth, spherical orb that pulsed with a gentle, psychic rhythm. You should not have come in here, the agent said, her voice a low hiss. Her Mienshao took a ready stance, its long, whip-like arms poised to strike. Ash didn't have time for a prolonged battle. He needed to end this quickly. He looked at the glowing artifacts. He looked at the shard around his neck, which was vibrating so intensely it was almost painful. He felt a strange pull towards the spherical orb. An idea, born from the visions of his ancestor, sparked in his mind. Use their strength against them. Pikachu, Thunderbolt, he commanded. But he didn't point at the Mienshao. He pointed at the psychic orb. Fool. The agent spat. You'll destroy it. The bolt of electricity struck the orb. But it didn't shatter. It absorbed the energy, its gentle pulsing intensifying into a blinding, rhythmic strobing. It released a wave of pure, concentrated psychic energy. Not an attack, but a powerful, disorienting wave of raw thought and emotion. The agent cried out, clutching her head. Her Mienshao, a Pokémon finely attuned to psychic energy, was overwhelmed, staggering back in confusion. But Ash, anchored by the obsidian shard, felt the wave wash over him not as an attack, but as an invitation. He reached out and laid his hand on the orb. The world dissolved. He was standing in a forge of impossible light, watching his ancestor, a man who looked startlingly like himself, but with older, warier eyes, hammering a piece of obsidian that seemed to have fallen from the night sky. With each strike of the hammer, a vision, a memory, was beaten into the stone. The happy, harmonious city. The creeping, silent void. He was not just making a tool, he was forging a library of memories, a warning for the future. The scene shifted. The ancestor stood before another man, a figure clad in the archaic robes of a scholar. They stood on a high precipice overlooking a valley where the silent void was being held at bay by a ring of powerful psychic Pokémon. You cannot hold it forever, the scholar argued, his voice filled with the same weary despair as Professor Carolina's. Look at them. They suffer. Let the silence bring them peace. Let it cure them of the chaos that will only lead to their destruction. A world without sorrow is a world without joy, the ancestor countered, his voice ringing with a familiar, unwavering conviction. A cage is not a cure. He saw his ancestor and the scholar fight, not with Pokémon, but with their own ideologies, their own followers. It was a schism, a civil war fought on the edge of oblivion. He saw his ancestor, realizing he could not win outright without sacrificing the very world he sought to protect, make a terrible choice. He didn't destroy the Silent One. He couldn't. Instead, he and the Guardians sealed it away, a compromise that left the entity dormant but not defeated, and left the scholar's ideology to fester in the shadows, to be passed down through generations, to become the order of the unseen. The vision faded. Ash was back in the vault, his hand on the orb, the agent and her Miensho still reeling from the psychic pulse. The battle outside was still raging. He had been gone for only a second. He knew what he had to do. He scooped up the 3 artifacts, his mind clear, his purpose solidified. This was not just his fight, it was a legacy. He turned to the agent. It's over. Just then, the vault door was ripped from its hinges by Cynthia's Garchomp. The Order agents, seeing their prize in Ash's hands and their position overrun, made a tactical decision. One of them threw down a smoke bomb, and another, a powerful Alakazam, used teleport. In a flash of psychic light, they were gone. They had escaped, but they had failed. The artifacts were safe. The aftermath was somber. The beautiful research center was a wreck of smoke, sludge, and scorch marks. The joyous music of the festival, still playing outside, seemed to mock the scene of violation within. Cynthia's League officials had arrived, securing the building and taking a distraught, silent Professor Carolina into custody. The look of deep, personal hurt on Cynthia's face as she watched them lead her old friend away was more devastating than any physical blow. They stood outside, the 4 of them, the cool night air a relief after the smoke-filled hall. The last of the festival's fireworks exploded in the sky, painting the silhouette of Mount Coronet in brilliant, fleeting colors. She believed it, Cynthia said, her voice barely a whisper. She truly believed she was saving the world by helping them destroy it. The betrayal had changed the nature of the war. The enemy was no longer a faceless shadow. It had a face, a voice, a believable, twisted motivation. And it could be anyone. Ash looked up at the great mountain, its peak a jagged line of black against the star-dusted sky. He clutched the artifacts, their faint glow a warm presence against his chest. The vision had given him not just knowledge, but clarity. He understood the ancient roots of this conflict and his own place within it. He was not just fighting a cult. He was the inheritor of a sacred duty, the final soldier in an ideological war that had been raging for centuries.
The festival was over. The real battle, for the soul of the world, was waiting for them on that frozen, silent peak.
Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. The Voice of the Silent One. The mountain did not welcome them. It endured them. Mount Coronet was a colossal, jagged tooth of rock and ice, a monument to the raw, untamed power that had forged the Sinnoh region. The climb was a relentless, brutal ascent into a world that grew progressively more hostile with every upward step. The cheerful forests and gentle slopes of the lower mountain gave way to a stark, alpine landscape of wind-scoured stone and hardy, twisted pines. Soon, even those gave way to the snowline, a demarcation point between the living world and a realm of eternal, frozen silence. The wind was a constant, physical presence, a howling predator that clawed at their parkas and screamed in their ears. The air grew thin, each breath a conscious effort, a small victory against the crushing altitude. They moved in a tight, focused line, a small flicker of warmth and color against the overwhelming canvas of white and gray. Cynthia, her usual elegant attire swapped for practical, insulated gear, led the way, her steps sure and certain on the treacherous, ice-slicked paths. Her Garchomp moved beside her, a dark, powerful silhouette, its body seemingly impervious to the biting cold. The betrayal in Celestic Town had left its mark. The easy banter that had once filled their journeys was gone, replaced by a grim, shared purpose. Brock was a pillar of quiet competence, constantly monitoring their physical condition, ensuring they stayed hydrated and watching for the telltale signs of altitude sickness. Serena, her performer's grace translated into a surprising resilience, moved with a fierce determination, her gaze often drifting to Ash, a silent current of worry and support flowing between them. But it was Ash who had changed the most. The visions from the vault had settled deep within him, not as a burden, but as a lens through which he now saw the world. He carried the weight of his ancestors' legacy, the ancient conflict now a burning, personal duty. He was quieter, his usual boundless energy focused inward, honed to a razor's edge. He walked with his head up, his eyes constantly scanning the unforgiving landscape, his senses attuned to every shift in the wind, every tremor in the ice. The obsidian shard, resting against his chest beneath his parka, pulsed with a faint, steady warmth, a silent companion in the cold. As they climbed higher, into the perpetual twilight of the upper slopes where the sun was a pale, distant disk, they began to feel it. It started as a low, subliminal hum at the very edge of hearing, a vibration that seemed to resonate in the bones rather than the ears. At first, Ash thought it was just the mountain, the deep, ancient groaning of rock and ice. But it grew steadily in intensity, coalescing into something more. It was a psychic broadcast. Unlike the irritating static in Luminance City, this was a coherent signal. It had no words, no voice, but it spoke directly to the mind. It was a wave of pure, unadulterated logic. It was the psychic equivalent of a perfectly solved equation, a flawless, crystalline structure of thought that promised an end to all the messy, inefficient variables of existence.
It whispered of a world without pain because there would be no joy to contrast it. It promised an end to conflict because there would be no individual will to clash. It was the voice of the Silent One, seeping out into the world, and it was hideously, terrifyingly seductive.
The native Pokémon of the mountain were the first to succumb. A flock of Skarmory, their metallic wings usually catching the light with fierce pride, flew past in a rigid, unnervingly perfect V formation, their movements devoid of the slightest individual variation. A lone Abomasnow stood motionless on a distant ridge, not a guardian of its territory, but a silent, frozen statue, its eyes vacant. The spark was gone. The team's own Pokémon felt the strain. Serena's Braixen whimpered softly, pressing against her leg for reassurance, the psychic voice, a constant, confusing pressure.
Brock had to recall his Crobat when its sensitive ears made it almost unable to fly in a straight line. Even Pikachu, a bastion of indomitable will, had to constantly shake his head as if to clear it of a persistent, unwanted thought. The bond they all shared with their trainers was an anchor, a shield of chaotic, emotional warmth against the encroaching, logical cold. But the shield was under constant assault.
"It's trying to get inside your head," Cynthia stated, her voice tight, her hand resting on Garchomp's powerful flank. "It finds your doubts, your fears, and offers a simple, elegant solution. Stop feeling." Ash felt it too. But the shard, his ancestors' legacy, acted as a filter. He was not overwhelmed by the psychic pressure, but he could hear the voice with a terrifying clarity. He understood the appeal. It offered him a world where he would never have to feel the sting of betrayal from a trusted friend like Professor Carolina. A world where Serena would never be in danger. A world where the crushing weight of his duty would simply cease to be. All he had to do was let go. "No," he whispered to the wind, his breath fogging in the frigid air. He drew on the memory of Pikachu's unwavering loyalty, of Serena's dazzling smile after her showcase victory, of the fiery clash of his battle with Cynthia. He remembered the chaos, the struggle, the joy, the pain. He held onto it, using it to build a wall against the silent logic. A cage is not a cure. They found the source of the broadcast not far from the entrance to the spear pillar. It was hidden, a masterpiece of stealth and engineering. A section of the sheer cliff face that looked like natural rock shimmered and dissolved as they approached, revealing a seamless, metallic door. The Order's base. They hadn't built on the mountain, they had built into it. A frontal assault is suicide, Cynthia analyzed, her strategic mind clicking into gear. The entrance will be heavily fortified. They'll know we're coming. "We can't just leave it," Serena insisted, her hands clenched. That sound is spreading. We have to stop it." Brock was studying the 3 artifacts Ash had recovered from the Celestic Vault. The horn-like flute, the crystal lens, and the spherical orb. These relics aren't just amplifiers, he mused, his datapad displaying complex energy signatures. They're tuners. They resonate with psychic energy. If we can get close enough to their broadcast antenna, we might be able to use these to generate a counter-frequency. A bubble of psychic silence that could mask our approach. It was a long shot, but it was their only shot. They found a narrow, ice-choked fissure in the rock a few hundred yards from the main entrance, a service conduit or a geothermal vent that led deep into the mountain. It was their way in. The interior of the base was a stark, sterile world of white corridors and cold, blue light. There was no clutter, no personalization. The Order members they glimpsed moved with a quiet, detached purpose, their faces serene and focused. They were acolytes in a temple of logic, their individuality already partially subsumed by the voice they were broadcasting. The silence was more unnerving than any alarm. With Brock using the artifacts to create a small, mobile, dead zone around them, they moved like ghosts through the facility. They had to separate to cover more ground, searching for the broadcast control center. Ash, with Pikachu on his shoulder, found himself in what appeared to be a central observation deck. A massive, floor-to-ceiling window looked out not to the mountain, but into the very heart of the base. A colossal cavern dominated by a terrifying piece of machinery. At its center, trapped in a crystalline cage shot through with energy conduits, was a Gardevoir. Its elegant form was contorted in agony, its eyes squeezed shut as its immense psychic power was forcibly siphoned, amplified, and broadcast. It was the living engine of the psychic plague spreading across the mountain. A beautiful, tragic irony, a voice said, calm and resonant, from behind him. That a Pokémon known for its boundless empathy is being used to broadcast the end of all emotion. Ash turned. He was not alone. The man who stood in the center of the observation deck was tall and imposing, with silver-streaked hair and a face that was handsome but held the cold, remote beauty of a statue. He wore the simple, unadorned black uniform of the Order, but he carried himself with an air of absolute authority. His eyes were a pale, piercing gray, and they held an ancient, weary intelligence. At his side, a massive, brilliantly purple Metagross floated silently, its psychic power a palpable, crushing weight in the air.
You are the Grand Master, Ash stated. It wasn't a question.
I am, the man replied, a faint, almost sad smile on his lips. He made no move to attack. This was not a confrontation of power, but of philosophy. I have followed your progress with great interest, Ash Ketchum. Or perhaps I should say, successor. You carry his will. The will of the man who chose chaos over peace, who doomed this world to an eternity of suffering out of a sentimental attachment to a flawed design. He gestured to the great window, to the tortured Gardevoir. We are correcting his mistake. The broadcast prepares the way. It softens the world's resistance, erodes the messy, illogical attachments that would cause them to fight the inevitable. When the time is right, when the spear pillar is aligned, we will not be taking the world. We will be liberating it, and it will welcome its liberation. You call this liberation? Ash shot back, his voice tight with fury, gesturing to the suffering Pokémon. You call peace a world where no one can feel anything. Feeling is the flaw, the Grandmaster countered, his voice never rising, his logic a cold, sharp scalpel. Show me an emotion that has not, at its heart, a seed of conflict. Love breeds jealousy. Hope breeds despair. Courage breeds recklessness. We offer a permanent solution. An end to the pain. Why do you cling so desperately to the disease? He raised a hand, and the air shimmered. Ash was suddenly seeing visions, not from his ancestor, but from the Grandmaster's own mind. He saw a world ravaged by a pointless, brutal war, Pokémon and people fighting and dying over a patch of worthless land. He saw a family torn apart by greed, a city starving while its leaders feasted. He saw a montage of endless, repeating history, a symphony of suffering, all of it fueled by passion, by emotion, by the very bonds Ash held so sacred. Then, the vision shifted. He showed Ash a new world, the world under the Silent One. Cities moved with the perfect, silent efficiency of a clockwork mechanism. There was no crime, no poverty, no war. There was no art, no laughter, no love. There was only the calm, serene, silent hum of absolute, logical order. You have the power to stop this suffering, the Grandmaster's voice echoed in his mind. The Silent One slumbers, but it hears the call of the Master of Bonds. You are not its key. You are its partner. Help us usher in this peace. Help us save them from themselves. For a terrifying second, Ash felt the pull. The logic was flawless. The promise was absolute. But then, he felt Pikachu shift on his shoulder, a familiar, warm weight. He thought of Serena's hand in his, of Brock's unshakable friendship, of the fierce, burning pride in Charizard's eyes. He thought of the beautiful, chaotic, imperfect world he fought for. Your peace is a prison, Ash said, the visions shattering around him. And I'd rather live in a flawed world that's free than a perfect one in a cage. The Grandmaster's sad smile returned. So said your ancestor, and he was wrong. He turned his back on Ash. My acolytes will handle you. I have a ceremony to prepare. He and his Metagross phased through the far wall, leaving Ash alone with the horrifying view. The time for talk was over. A sharp explosion from the corridor outside signaled the arrival of the others. Cynthia, Serena, and Brock burst onto the observation deck, their faces grim. We found the control room, Cynthia said, pointing down a separate corridor. It's heavily guarded. The commander from the temple is there. I know what's powering it, Ash replied, his gaze fixed on the trapped Gardevoir. We're not just shutting it down, we're getting her out. The control room was a hornet's nest. The commander, her face a mask of cold fury, stood before a bank of consoles, flanked by her elite guard. The air crackled with contained power. You will not interfere with the Grandmaster's great work, she snarled. The battle was instant and brutal. Within the confines of the control room, there was no room for wide-sweeping maneuvers. It was a close-quarters brawl of power and speed. Cynthia's Garchomp was a force of destruction, its dragon claws clashing with the claws of a powerful Bisharp. Serena's Sylveon, a new, graceful addition to her team, used its ribbon-like feelers to create dazzling shields of light, deflecting attacks while its Moonblast illuminated the grim chamber. Brock's Steelix, summoned in a flash, formed a living wall of iron, absorbing a barrage of attacks from the commander's Magnezone. Ash and Pikachu were the tip of the spear. They moved as one, a blur of yellow and black, weaving through the chaos. Their target was the commander herself, and her venomous Dragalge. Pikachu, use the conduits, agility, Ash directed. Pikachu shot up the walls, using the massive power cables as his personal highway, too fast for the lumbering Dragalge to track. Pin it down. Sludge wave, the commander roared. A toxic tide of purple sludge flooded the floor, but Pikachu was already airborne, leaping from a conduit on the ceiling. Electro Ball. The sphere of electricity shot down, striking the Dragalge and sending it reeling. But the commander was ruthless. She had her Magnezone unleash a tri-attack, not at Pikachu, but at the very console controlling the containment field around the Gardevoir, causing it to spark and fluctuate. If we cannot have its power, she hissed, then no one will. A psychic backlash of this magnitude will destroy this entire mountain peak, and you with it. The machine trapping the Gardevoir began to whine, a high-pitched, terrifying sound. Red lights flashed across the control room. The Pokémon inside thrashed, its agony reaching a fever pitch. A psychic storm was brewing, one that would annihilate them all. While Cynthia and the others fought desperately to hold back the guards, Ash knew there was only one path. He had to do what he did for Lugia. He had to connect. Pikachu, give me cover, Thunderbolt, full power, Ash yelled. Pikachu unleashed a massive, sustained bolt of lightning, forcing the commander and her Pokémon to shield themselves. In that moment, Ash vaulted over a console and ran, not towards the controls, but towards the containment field itself. The air was thick with raw, agonizing psychic energy. It felt like walking into a hurricane of pure pain. The shard on his chest burned with a fierce, protective heat. He pressed his hand against the crystalline barrier. He didn't try to break it. He closed his eyes and pushed his own consciousness through the storm, not with force, but with empathy. He didn't send commands or intentions. He sent feelings. He projected the calm of the Celestic Town Shrine, the fierce loyalty he felt for Pikachu, the warmth of Serena's smile. He offered the Gardevoir not a strategy, but a shared strength, an anchor. Through the psychic maelstrom, he felt a flicker of response. A single, clear note of gratitude in the screaming chaos. The Gardevoir, its own will bolstered by his, began to fight back. It stopped thrashing against its prison and focused its immense power inward, then outward. It didn't attack the machine. It calmed it. The psychic storm began to recede, the pure, violent energy being drawn back into the Gardevoir, now under its control. With a final, defiant psychic pulse, the Gardevoir shattered the energy conduits from within. The machine gave a final, shuddering groan and exploded, showering the room in a rain of harmless sparks. The broadcast stopped. The voice in their heads vanished. The silence was absolute. The commander stared in disbelief, her plan in ruins. Before she could react, Cynthia's Garchomp was on her, and the battle was over. But as they moved to secure her, a wave of psychic energy washed through the room, and the commander, along with her defeated guards, vanished in a flash of light. The Grandmaster's Metagross had teleported them away. This changes nothing. The Grandmaster's voice echoed in the room, a final, chilling message. The process is irreversible. The mountain has heard the call. Meet me at the Spear Pillar, successor, and witness the dawn of a silent, perfect world. A deep, rumbling groan shook the entire facility. The base was collapsing. We have to go, Brock yelled. They fled, the freed Gardevoir moving alongside them, its body weak but its spirit strong. It used its remaining power to clear their path, teleporting them through collapsing corridors until they burst out of the fissure and back onto the frozen, windswept slopes of the mountain. Behind them, a huge section of the cliff face imploded, sealing the Order's base in a tomb of rock and ice. They stood on the ledge, battered and exhausted, the cold air a shocking, welcome reality. The Gardevoir gave Ash a deep, grateful bow, its psychic voice a warm whisper of thanks in his mind, before teleporting away to recover its strength in solitude. They had won. They had silenced the voice. But as they looked up, the sky above the summit of Mount Coronet seemed to darken. The clouds swirled with an unnatural, violent energy, and the very air crackled with a power that was not of their world. The broadcast had been a prelude, an overture. Now, the final performance was about to begin. The Spear Pillar, the altar where time and space were born, was waiting. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. The Altar of Creation. The final ascent was a climb into madness. The wind no longer howled, it whispered, carrying fragments of impossible conversations and the faint, discordant chime of a bell that wasn't there. The sky above the summit was no longer sky. It was a bruised, swirling vortex of sickly purples and greens, a celestial wound torn open to reveal a glimpse of something cold and alien beyond. The laws of physics felt thin here, worn threadbare like an old coat. Gravity seemed inconsistent, the ground occasionally lurching as if the mountain were taking a sharp, sudden breath. They were approaching the Spear Pillar, the genesis point of the Sinnoh region, the altar where the gods of time and space had been born. It was a place of immense, sacred power, and it was being defiled. They emerged onto the final plateau, and the sight that greeted them was one of ancient grandeur and terrifying sacrilege. A long, ruined colonnade of stone pillars, etched with the myths of creation, formed a path to a raised, circular dais. This was the Spear Pillar. The very air crackled and hummed, thick with an energy that made the teeth ache and the hair stand on end. The Grand Master was waiting for them on the dais. He stood with his back to them, his arms outstretched as if to embrace the weeping sky. His shiny Metagross floated silently beside him, a malevolent purple star against the swirling chaos above. Arrayed below the dais were his elite guard, including the temple commander, her face a mask of renewed, fanatical zeal. They were not preparing for a battle. They were priests awaiting the arrival of their god. In the center of the dais, the three artifacts from Celestic Town, the Adamant Orb, the Lustrous Orb, and the Gracious Orb, as Brock had identified them, were placed on pedestals. They pulsed with a violent, unstable light, their power being forcibly drawn and channeled into a complex arcane circle etched into the stone floor. This was not a broadcast. This was an invocation. "You are too late, successor," the Grand Master said, turning to face them. His voice was calm, but it held a new, triumphant resonance that seemed to shake the very stones. His pale eyes glowed with a faint, internal light. "The song has been sung. The world has been prepared. Now, the vessel shall be claimed." "Vessel?" Cynthia demanded, her Garchomp moving to her side, a low, menacing growl rumbling in its chest. "What have you done?" "The Silent One is not a creature of this dimension," the Grand Master explained, his tone that of a lecturer revealing a grand, universal truth. "It is a consciousness, a being of pure, perfect logic. It cannot simply be awakened. It must be invited. Given a form. And what better form than that of a god? He gestured to the sky, to the swirling vortex. This hallowed ground does not just connect to time and space. It connects to their masters. My ritual, amplified by the psychic resonance left behind by our broadcast, is calling them. It is creating a wound in reality, a doorway through which the consciousness of the Silent One can pass. It will merge with one of the creators of this world, overriding its chaotic, primal will with a new, divine logic. We will not have a mere guardian. We will have a god of order. The sheer, blasphemous audacity of the plan was staggering. They were not just trying to unleash a monster. They were attempting to hijack a god, to turn one of the fundamental forces of their reality into the engine of its own destruction. That's insane. Serena cried out, her Sylveon's feelers twitching with alarm. Is it? The Grand Master countered. To replace a flawed, temperamental god of chaos with a perfect, benevolent god of peace. I call it salvation. As he spoke, the world gave a violent, sickening lurch. One of the ancient pillars on their left flickered, its stone form dissolving for a half-second into a shimmering, translucent image of a tree that had not yet grown, before snapping back into existence. A temporal flux. He's not just calling them, he's destabilizing their domains. Brock yelled, his eyes wide with terror and scientific awe. The fabric of space-time is tearing apart at the seams. This was the battlefield. Not a static arena of rock and ice, but a churning, unpredictable canvas of collapsing reality. There is no more room for debate. Cynthia's voice was like forged steel. Her champion's authority asserted itself. A point of order in the chaos. This ends now. We will not allow you to desecrate this place. Garchomp, Dragon Rush. The battle for the fate of reality began. Cynthia's Garchomp became a blue streak of vengeance, rocketing toward the dais. The Order's elite guard moved to intercept their own powerful Pokémon, a Bisharp, a Magnezone, a Weavile, leaping forward. The fight was a chaotic, desperate struggle against not only the Order but the environment itself. A spatial distortion warped the field, momentarily stretching the distance between Brock's Steelix and an attacking Weavile to an impossible length. A pocket of accelerated time caused Serena's Sylveon to unleash a moonblast in what felt, to her, like a split second, the attack appearing almost instantaneously. Watch the ground, Brock shouted, acting as their anchor to sanity. The patterns on the stone are flickering before a shift. Don't get caught in a loop. Cynthia was a masterful field commander, her voice cutting through the chaos, directing her Pokémon and their own with a clarity that defied the madness around them. She fought with the cold fury of a queen defending her most sacred ground. But the Order's agents were fanatics, willing to sacrifice their Pokémon in reckless gambits to buy their master more time. The ritual on the dais was nearing its peak, the arcane circle glowing with an almost unbearable light. Ash knew the true battle was not with the guards. He had to get to the Grand Master. Pikachu, let's go. He broke from the main skirmish, sprinting up the colonnade, Pikachu a yellow bolt of lightning on his shoulder. The Grand Master watched him come, his expression one of detached amusement. Your predictable heroism is your greatest weakness, he said. Metagross, psychic. The massive purple Pokémon's eyes flared. Ash was lifted from his feet, his body caught in an invisible, crushing grip. But as the psychic power enveloped him, the obsidian shard on his chest blazed with a fierce, black light. The vision of his ancestor flashed in his mind, not fighting the void, but standing his ground, an anchor of will in a sea of nothingness. Ash pushed back, not with power, but with presence. He focused on his bond with Pikachu, on the trust of his friends, on the weight of his legacy. The psychic grip faltered for an instant, it was enough. Pikachu, break free. Iron Tail. Pikachu, also caught in the psychic field, twisted his body and slammed his glowing tail not at Metagross, but at the empty air. The sharp, metallic tang of the attack seemed to ground the psychic energy, creating a feedback loop that shattered the hold. They dropped to the floor, landing in a crouch. Impossible, the Grand Master breathed, his composure finally cracking. No one should be able to resist a psychic of this magnitude. We're not just anyone, Ash retorted. Infernape, stand by for battle. The flame Pokémon appeared in a blast of defiant fire, his presence a raw, chaotic inferno in the cold, logical order of the ritual. The psychic duel began in earnest, A furious, close-quarters battle at the foot of the altar. Metagross fought with the cold, calculating precision of a supercomputer, its psychic attacks bending space, its meteor mash attacks appearing from impossible angles. But Infernape, fueled by Ash's passionate commands and his own indomitable spirit, was a storm of unpredictable fury. He used the temporal shifts to his advantage, launching a flare blitz that seemed to strike from the future, his fists a blur of mock punches that crossed warped space in a heartbeat. It was a battle of logic versus chaos, and chaos was holding its own. Suddenly, two colossal, world-shattering roars tore through the chaos, dwarfing the sounds of their battle. The swirling vortex in the sky ripped wide open. From the tear, two beings of unimaginable power and majesty began to emerge. One was a creature of shimmering pearlescent white and magenta, its form seeming to ripple and shift, the space around it bending and distorting. Palkia, the master of space. The other was a titan of dark blue steel and glowing cyan lines, its very presence radiating an ancient, unyielding power. As it emerged, a nearby pillar aged 1,000 years in a second, crumbling to dust, while a patch of ice beside it reversed its own timeline, melting back into water. Dialga, the master of time. They were not calm. They had been ripped from their domains, summoned by a profane ritual. Their eyes burned with a divine, terrifying rage, and they saw everything on the spear pillar, Order agents, Ash, Cynthia, as a single, infuriating infestation. Behold! The Grand Master cried, his voice ecstatic, his arms raised to the enraged gods. The vessels have arrived. Now, the true ascension begins. He slammed his hand onto the central pedestal. A beam of pure, agonizing psychic energy shot from the arcane circle, lancing towards the two legendary Pokémon. It was the essence of the Silent One, the psychic hook meant to latch onto one of them and begin the process of overriding their soul. No, you don't, Ash yelled. He knew what he had to do. The artifacts his ancestor had forged were not meant to suppress the gods, but to speak to them. To bridge the gap between mortal will and divine power. He sprinted past the battling Infernape and Metagross, leaping onto the dais itself. He ignored the Grand Master, ignored the searing energy of the ritual, and snatched the three orbs from their pedestals. The moment his hands closed around them, a torrent of raw, elemental power flooded his being. He felt the unyielding strength of time from the adamant orb, the infinite possibility of space from the lustrous orb, and the strange, anti-logic of the distortion world from the Gricious orb. Palkia let out a roar and unleashed its spatial rend, an attack that tore a glowing pink rift in the very air, aimed directly at the dais. Simultaneously, Dialga began to form its roar of time, a vortex of temporal energy that would not just destroy them but erase them from history. They were caught between two gods and a madman. Serena, Sylveon, mystical fire on Palkia's attack. Ash yelled, his voice amplified by the power of the orbs. He didn't know how he knew the move would work, he just did. Brock, Steelix, Iron Defense, full power. Brace against Dialga's roar. His friends, trusting him completely, reacted instantly. Sylveon's beautiful, protective flames met the spatial rend, not overpowering it, but destabilizing its spatial matrix, causing the reality-tearing slash to dissipate into a harmless shower of pink sparks. Steelix became a shining bastion of metal, taking the brunt of the temporal vortex, its ancient, stony body groaning under the strain but holding firm. Now it was his turn. Ash held the three orbs aloft. He didn't try to command the gods. He did what he had done with Lugia and Gardevoir. He opened his mind, using the orbs as a conduit, and he spoke. He did not use words. He projected his will, his memories, his unshakable belief in the chaotic beauty of their world. He showed them the courage of his Pokémon, the loyalty of his friends. He showed them the image of his ancestor standing against the void, not to destroy it, but to protect the freedom of what was behind him. He wasn't asking them to be his weapons. He was asking them to be his allies, to see the true enemy that sought to pervert their very existence. For a moment that stretched into an eternity, the two gods paused. Their divine rage was tempered by a flicker of confusion, then dawning comprehension. They felt his sincerity. They recognized the ancient power of the orbs, not as chains, but as a familiar, respectful greeting. The Grand Master watched, his face twisting in disbelief and fury. No, they are gods. They will not listen to the sentimental pleas of a child. You cannot stop this. Seeing his plan being undone, his connection to the gods severed by Ash's intervention, he made a final, desperate move. If they will not accept the gift willingly, he screamed, his voice raw with fanaticism, then I will force it upon them. He slammed both of his hands onto the arcane circle, pouring his own life force, his own psychic energy, into the ritual. The psychic beam heading for the sky intensified, turning from a focused lance into a massive, gaping maw. He was no longer trying to hook a god. He was ripping the doorway open wide enough for the Silent One to come through entirely. The vortex in the sky above them turned from a swirling wound into a perfect, circular hole of absolute, starless black. A silence fell that was so profound it was a physical pressure, a silence that consumed all sound, all thought, all feeling. From the hole, an entity of pure anti-emotion began to descend. It had no form, no substance. It was a wave of sentient nothingness, a psychic black hole that leached the color from the air and the warmth from their bodies. The Silent One was here. It ignored the order. It ignored Ash. Its pure, flawless logic had assessed the situation and identified the most powerful, and therefore most chaotic, being on the field. The being that represented the greatest threat to its fundamental nature of absolute order. The wave of sentient nothingness surged directly towards Cynthius Garchomp. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. A Date in the Eye of the Storm. The silence was not a peace, it was a wound. The raw, psychic pressure of the entity's presence was a physical force, sucking the warmth from the air, leaching the color from the stone. Cynthius Garchomp was frozen, not by ice or paralysis, but by a negation of its very being. The vibrant, chaotic aura of life that surrounded the powerful Pokémon was being systematically unwritten, smoothed over by the flawless, horrifying logic of the void. Garchomp. Cynthia's cry was sharp, her regal composure shattered by a wave of pure, visceral terror for her partner. The Grandmaster, a husk of a man now, his life force poured into his final, blasphemous offering, watched with a look of ecstatic fulfillment. This was the glorious, silent beginning. But Ash was the eye of the storm. The three orbs in his hands blazed with a light that defied the encroaching emptiness, a tricolored aura of raw, elemental power that pushed back against the void. He was no longer just a boy. He was a conduit, a bridge between the mortal and the divine. The knowledge of his ancestor flowed through him, not as a memory, but as pure instinct. He knew what he had to do. He didn't shout. He projected his will through the orbs, a command that was not a sound but a concept, fired directly into the minds of the two gods who still hung in the torn sky. Contain it, Dialga roared, a sound that was both ancient and new. It did not attack the Silent One. It attacked time itself. The moment froze. The descending wave of nothingness halted, its tendrils inches from Garchomp. The Order agents, the swirling debris, the very motes of dust in the air. All were locked in a single, perfect instant. Only Ash, his friends, Cynthia, and the gods themselves were exempt, existing outside the frozen stream of causality. In the same frozen moment, Palkia acted. It unleashed a spatial rend, but not as an attack. The pink slash of energy tore open a hole in reality around the Silent One, not touching it, but excising the very space it occupied. The void was scooped out of their dimension and sealed into a shimmering, pink-hued pocket of nothingness that hung in the air like a malevolent jewel. With a final, deafening roar that was both a warning and a promise, Dialga released its hold on time. The world snapped back into motion. The psychic pressure vanished. The hole in the sky sealed over, leaving behind a sky that was a pale, wounded blue. The pocket dimension containing the Silent One shimmered once, and then faded from sight, banished but not destroyed. The Grandmaster, his purpose complete and his life force spent, simply ceased. His body crumbled into fine, gray dust that was snatched away by the wind, leaving only his empty black uniform to flutter to the stones of the desecrated altar. The remaining Order agents, their god vanished and their master gone, were enveloped in a flash of purple light. The Grandmaster's Metagross, its final duty to its trainer fulfilled, teleported them away into the unknown. Silence returned to the spear pillar. But this time, it was a natural silence, the profound, weary quiet of a battlefield after the war has passed. The journey down the mountain was a descent into exhaustion. The adrenaline faded, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness and the heavy weight of what they had witnessed. Cynthius Garchomp was safe, but the memory of its near unmaking had left a visible tremor in the champion's usually steady hands. Brock was lost in thought, trying to reconcile the laws of physics with the divine intervention he had just recorded. They returned to Cynthia's villa, the tranquil sanctuary now feeling like a fortress against a world that had become unhinged. While Cynthia made a series of coded, urgent calls to a handful of trusted contacts within the global Pokémon League, and Brock sequestered himself with the data he'd collected, Ash and Serena found themselves standing on the wooden veranda, watching the sun set over the serene lake. The sky was a blaze of orange and pink, a beautiful, chaotic painting of color. It felt like an act of defiance against the memory of that perfect, starless void. Ash stood silently, his hands resting on the railing, the 3 creation orbs now resting in a specialized containment pouch at his belt. They felt impossibly heavy. He had touched the minds of gods, bent time and space to his will, and stood against a being of pure nothingness. And now, he was just a boy on a porch, watching a sunset. The contrast was a dizzying, hollow thing. Serena watched him, her heart aching. She saw the new weight behind his eyes, the subtle tension in his shoulders. He had carried them all through the storm, his will an unbreakable shield. But she knew, with a certainty that was both terrifying and absolute, that the storm had taken a piece of him, and that the worst of it was yet to come. "You can't keep doing that," she said, her voice so soft it was almost lost in the evening breeze. Ash turned to look at her. "Doing what?" "Being the only thing that stands in the way," she said, her blue eyes searching his. "Up there, on that mountain, I wasn't scared of the monsters, or the crazy man, or the sky falling apart. I was scared for you. I saw you holding those orbs, talking to gods, and for a second, I was afraid you weren't going to come back. That you would just become part of it all." Her voice broke on the last few words. She wasn't the confident performer now, or the resilient traveler. She was just Serena, and she was afraid of losing the person who mattered most to her in the world. Ash was silent for a long moment. He looked at his hands, half expecting to see them glowing with residual power. He had felt it up there, the temptation of that immense strength, the clarity of a divine perspective. It would have been so easy to let go, to become the fulcrum, the legend, the successor. But something had held him back. "I came back because you were there," he said, his voice a low, steady rumble. He finally met her gaze, and the weariness in his eyes was replaced by a profound, unwavering clarity. "When the Grandmaster showed me his perfect world, all I could think about was how empty it would be without your smile. When I stood in front of Dialga and Palkia, all I could think was that I had to protect the world that had you in it." He took a step closer, his hand coming up to gently cup her cheek. His touch was warm, real, grounding them both in the quiet reality of the sunset. "Everything I'm fighting for," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he rarely showed. "All the battles, the training, the legacy, it wouldn't mean anything without you here to share it with." The space between them vanished. The kiss was not a dramatic, world-changing event. It was as quiet and as natural as the sunset itself. It was a moment of profound peace in the eye of an apocalyptic storm. It was a confirmation of a truth that had existed between them for 1,000 miles and 100 battles. It was a promise. A silent, shared vow that whatever came next, they would face it together. They stood there for a long time, her head resting on his chest, his arms wrapped around her, the vibrant colors of the sky reflecting in the still waters of the lake. The world was broken and a monster was waiting in the wings, but in that moment, everything was all right. As the last sliver of the sun dipped below the horizon, Ash felt the obsidian shard at his neck pulse with a gentle, resonant warmth. He closed his eyes, and the visions, the fragmented memories of his ancestor, finally coalesced not into a warning, but into a complete thought. He saw the final confrontation. His ancestor, with the guardians at his side, facing the Silent One. But he wasn't trying to destroy it. He was trying to reason with it. He was offering it a place, a balance. He saw the scholar, the first Grand Master, interfering, his grief and rage at the chaos of the world twisting the ritual, forcing the ancestor's hand. The sealing wasn't a victory. It was a failed negotiation. A compromise born of desperation. "It cannot be destroyed," the ancestor's memory whispered in his mind. "It is a fundamental constant. Order. As necessary as chaos. But it must not be allowed to rule. It must be taught." Ash's eyes snapped open. He understood. The prophecy of the Master of Bonds was not about reawakening the entity to serve it or to seal it away again. It was about finishing the conversation his ancestor had started. The final battle wasn't about winning. It was about choosing the fate of their reality. The unseen pinnacle, he said aloud. Serena looked up at him. What? That's where he did it, Ash said, his voice filled with a new, grim purpose. He gently pulled away, his hands still holding hers. That's where my ancestor performed the first sealing. It's a place, a real place. A mountain peak so remote it isn't on any modern map. A place where the veil between dimensions is naturally thin. He looked at her, his expression now one of absolute resolve. The Grand Master didn't just summon the Silent One. He issued a challenge. He showed me the path. Palkia didn't destroy the entity, it just moved it. It's waiting for me there, at the pinnacle. The quiet moment was over. The eye of the storm had passed. The path to the end was now clear. They walked back into the villa, hand in hand. Cynthia and Brock looked up from a holographic map of Sinnoh, their expressions grim. We have a problem, Cynthia said, her voice heavy. My contacts are reporting strange atmospheric phenomena, localized psychic dead zones. It's starting again. Whatever you did up there, it was temporary. The entity you contained is already beginning to exert its influence, testing the walls of its prison. I know, Ash said, his voice calm and clear, drawing the attention of everyone in the room. And I know where we have to go to stop it for good. He walked to the map, his finger tracing a path to a remote, blank area in the far northern mountain ranges. There, he said. The unseen pinnacle. His gaze was steady, his purpose absolute. He was no longer just a trainer fighting a shadowy cult. He was the inheritor of a sacred duty, walking the final steps of a journey that had begun centuries ago. And this time, he would not be walking it alone. Chapter 8 End. Chapter 9. The unseen pinnacle. The world north of the spear pillar was a vast, empty page on which the laws of nature had been written in a hurried, drunken scrawl. There were no maps, no roads, no signs of human life. There was only a sprawling, tundra-like expanse of frozen earth and shattered rock that stretched to a horizon of jagged, teeth-like mountains. The sky was a permanent, bruised twilight, the sun a forgotten memory. This was the empty space, the margin of the world where reality wore thin. This was the path to the unseen pinnacle. Their journey was a silent pilgrimage into the heart of unreality. The air itself was a threat, not just cold, but imbued with a strange, dissonant quality that frayed the nerves. Sounds were wrong. The crunch of their boots on the permafrost sometimes echoed a second too late. The wind sometimes carried the scent of a long-dead ocean or a forest that had never grown there. They were walking through the lingering psychic trauma of the world's creation, a place where the rough drafts of existence had been discarded and left to rot. Brock, the man of science and logic, was the most visibly affected. He would stop, his head cocked, staring at a rock formation that, for a fleeting instant, seemed to be made of flowing water. His datapad was a useless brick, its sensors overwhelmed by readings that defied every known principle of physics. He was a cartographer in a land without fixed points, and the strain was etched on his face. Cynthia, the champion, was a pillar of controlled force. She walked with her Garchomp at her side, the two of them a singular unit of will against the creeping madness. Yet, even she was not immune. She would occasionally pause, her gaze lost in the distance, as if seeing a ghost on the horizon that only she could perceive. The memory of the void's touch on her partner had left a scar, a vulnerability that the land itself seemed to be probing. Serena was their emotional shield. While the world tried to sow discord and doubt, she focused on the one, immutable constant in her life, Ash. She walked close to him, her presence a silent, unwavering statement of faith. When the wind whispered a suggestion of futility into Brock's ear, or when a shimmering mirage showed Cynthia a vision of a defeated Garchomp, it was Serena's quiet, determined voice that would cut through the illusion, asking a simple, grounding question about their supplies or their path. She was fighting the unreality with reality, her love a weapon against the creeping despair. And Ash was their guide. The legacy of his ancestor was no longer a vision or a memory. It was a compass in his soul. He navigated the impossible landscape with an instinct that defied logic. He would lead them to the left of a ridge that seemed solid, only for them to look back and see it dissolve into mist. He would find the one solid path across a frozen river whose ice flowed in two directions at once. He was not merely walking through the land, he was reading its ancient, broken language. The obsidian shard on his chest was a source of constant, low-level warmth, a shield against the worst of the land's psychic emanations. But he felt the pressure. It was the voice of the Silent One, not a broadcast, but a seeping, pervasive influence oozing from its temporary prison. It was a feeling of profound, soul-crushing exhaustion. It didn't scream or threaten. It simply suggested that stopping was the most logical course of action. Why struggle? Why feel the cold, the fear, the weight of this impossible task? Rest is peace. Silence is serenity. Let go. He fought it with memories. The taste of Brock's stew on a cold mountain night. The roar of the crowd at Serena's victory. The fierce, exhilarating clash of his battle with Cynthia. He held onto the beautiful, chaotic, inefficient moments of his life and used them to build a fortress in his mind. After 3 days of this grueling, mind-bending trek, they saw it. It did not stand out from the other peaks due to its height, but due to its wrongness. The unseen pinnacle was a spike of pure black, obsidian-like rock that seemed to absorb the light around it. The swirling, twilight sky seemed to bend towards its peak, as if reality itself were liquid draining into a hole. A faint, violet shimmer, like heat haze in a frozen world, clung to its slopes. It was the cage. The prison Palkia had made. "That's it," Ash said, his voice a cloud of condensation in the frigid air. The place where the first seal was cast. The ascent was the final test. The psychic pressure intensified with every foot of altitude gained. The suggestions of the Silent One became more personal, more insidious. It whispered to Brock of the futility of knowledge in a universe of gods and monsters. It whispered to Cynthia of the ultimate failure of a champion who could not protect her most sacred ground. It whispered to Serena of a future where Ash was consumed by his destiny, leaving her alone. They fought back, together. When Brock stumbled, his face pale with doubt, Ash clapped a hand on his shoulder. "We need your eyes, Brock. Keep us grounded." When Cynthia hesitated, her gaze lost, Serena touched her arm. "He needs you. We all do." They climbed not just as a team, but as a single, multi-part organism, each one supporting the weaknesses of the others, their bonds a living shield against the encroaching silence. As they neared the summit, the path narrowed to a single, treacherous ledge, and there, blocking their path, it stood. It was the Grandmaster's shiny Metagross. It floated silently in the center of the path, its metallic purple armor seeming to drink in the violet light of the unstable sky. Its red eyes were not filled with malice or rage, but with a profound, unshakable purpose. It was not waiting for a battle, it was waiting for an appointment. "It's guarding the path," Cynthia said, her hand moving to one of her Pokeballs. "The final will of its master." "Let me," Ash said, stepping forward. "This is my fight. It's part of the legacy." Cynthia looked at him, then at the Metagross, and understood. This was not a battle for territory or for victory. It was a final ideological argument, and only Ash could make it. "We will handle any interference," she stated, she, Brock, and Serena taking up defensive positions behind him, a silent, supportive wall at his back. Ash walked forward onto the ledge, the world falling away into a swirling abyss of cloud and distorted space on either side. He and Pikachu stood alone before the final guardian. The Metagross's voice entered his mind, not with its own thoughts, but with the cold, perfect logic of its master, a final, recorded message. "It is the duty of the enlightened to correct the flawed. You defend chaos. You champion suffering. This last barrier is a testament to reason. Prove that your chaos has a greater purpose than our peace, or fall before the finality of logic." "I don't have to prove anything," Ash said, his voice calm and steady. "I just have to show you what you've chosen to forget. The reason we fight, the reason we feel, it's what makes life worth living. Pikachu, let's go." The battle for the pinnacle began. "Metagross, Meteor Mash," Ash commanded, knowing the psychic titan would react with impossible speed. He commanded his opponent's Pokémon, Serena exclaimed in confusion. "No," Brock said, his eyes wide. "He's not commanding it. He's predicting it, he's starting the battle a step ahead." As Ash spoke, the Metagross's psychic mind had already formulated the most logical opening move, a high-power, high-priority physical attack to overwhelm the smaller opponent. It shrouded itself in energy and shot forward. "Pikachu, agility, into the fissure," Ash snapped. To their left, the very rock of the mountain path flickered, a spatial distortion showing a momentary glimpse of a deep, crystalline cave within the stone. Pikachu, moving with a speed that was almost precognitive, leapt not away from the Metagross, but sideways, phasing through the solid rock as if it were a hologram. vanishing into the momentary fissure. The meteor mash slammed into the empty space he had just occupied, the force of it cracking the very air. The Metagross paused, its cold mind recalibrating. Its opponent had used the battlefield's instability as a defensive maneuver. An illogical, unpredictable variable. Now, Pikachu! Thunderbolt! Ash roared. Pikachu burst back out of the solid rock 20 yards behind the Metagross, the fissure having vanished as quickly as it appeared. He was already airborne, unleashing a massive bolt of lightning that struck the psychic behemoth in its back. The Metagross roared, a sound of fury and frustration, not of pain. It spun, its eyes glowing. Order must be imposed upon chaos. The Grandmaster's voice echoed in their minds. It unleashed a psychic blast, but it didn't hurl a physical object. It tore a chunk of frozen time from a nearby glacier and hurled it at Pikachu. It was a shard of reality where time moved 1,000 times slower. Quick attack, dodge it, Ash yelled. Pikachu shot across the ledge, a yellow blur, but the shard of slow time seemed to bend space, tracking him. It was about to hit. Serena, now, Ash shouted, without looking back. Serena reacted on pure instinct. Sylveon, mystical fire. A burst of pink and orange flame shot from behind Ash, striking the slow time shard. The chaotic, spiritual energy of the fairy-type move didn't destroy the shard but unraveled its temporal properties. The attack fizzled out, dissolving into harmless snowflakes. The Metagross turned its full attention to the group, its psychic power flaring. Interference is illogical. It must be eliminated. You're not fighting just him, Cynthia declared, her voice ringing with the authority of a champion. You are fighting all of us. Garchomp, Dragon Rush. Cynthia and Brock joined the fray, their Pokémon launching coordinated assaults to keep the Metagross from focusing solely on Ash. It became a desperate, swirling battle on a knife's edge of reality. Garchomp's claws would leave trails of spatial distortion in the air. Steelix's iron tail would strike the ground, only for the ground to ripple like water. But the Metagross was a monster. Empowered by the ambient energy of the pinnacle, it was a god in its own right. It used psychic to tear chunks of the mountain free, hovering them in the air as shields and projectiles. It calculated every angle, every probability, every variable, except one. The bond between Ash and his Pokémon. It's thinking like a computer, Ash realized, watching the Metagross perfectly counter a combined attack from Garchomp and Steelix. It's all logic, no instinct. We have to be something it can't calculate. He saw his opening. The Metagross had positioned itself in the center of the ledge, creating a defensive perimeter of floating rocks, a perfect, logical fortress. Pikachu, Volt Tackle. Ash commanded. Pikachu cloaked himself in his most powerful, most reckless attack and charge, a living thunderbolt aimed at the heart of the fortress. A direct frontal assault is statistically improbable to succeed, the Grandmaster's voice stated in their minds. Reckless, chaotic, futile. Exactly. Ash roared back. The Metagross raised a massive shield of rock to intercept the charge. But just before impact, Ash gave the real command. Iron Tail, on the ground. Pikachu, still cloaked in the energy of Volt Tackle, flipped in midair and slammed his steel-hard tail onto the path beneath him. The resulting shockwave wasn't an attack. It was a catalyst. The unstable ground, already frayed at the edges of reality, fractured. But it didn't just break. It split along a dimensional seam. For a terrifying second, the world split in two. The ledge they were on became two parallel ledges, separated by a churning, violet void. Ash and Pikachu were on one side. The Metagross, its rock shield now blocking nothing, was on the other. Its perfect, logical defense had been rendered useless by an attack that had targeted reality itself. Pikachu, Ash said, his voice dropping low, his focus absolute. Let's show it what chaos can really do. He held up his hand, and the obsidian shard blazed. He wasn't just giving a command. He was sharing his will, his ancestors' knowledge, his absolute trust, directly with his partner. Pikachu's body began to spark, not with yellow lightning, but with a brilliant, white-gold energy. The raw, chaotic power of their bond, amplified by the pinnacle's strange energies, was manifesting. 10 million volt thunderbolt, Ash whispered. Pikachu leapt into the air, and for a moment, he was not a mouse, but a star. He unleashed a torrent of multicolored lightning, a rainbow of pure, untamed chaotic energy. It was not a single bolt, but a storm, a living wave of power that leapt across the dimensional rift as if it weren't there. The Metagross, for the first time, knew something its master had not prepared it for. It knew fear. It raised a psychic shield, the most powerful it could muster. But you cannot block a storm. You can only endure it. The rainbow of lightning struck, and the world became white. The sound was not a crack of thunder, but the sound of 1,000 songs being sung at once, a symphony of pure, beautiful chaos. When their vision returned, the dimensional rift was gone. The path was one again. And the Metagross lay in a smoking crater, its powerful body still, its psychic light extinguished. It had been defeated not by superior power or strategy, but by a concept it could not compute. The illogical, invincible power of love. Ash rushed to Pikachu's side. His partner was drained, barely able to stand, but his eyes were bright with victory. Ash scooped him up, holding him close. "You did it, buddy. You did it." The body of the Metagross began to glow, a soft, purple light. It wasn't fading or exploding. It was dissolving. It had fulfilled its final purpose. Its form broke down into a million points of light that drifted up towards the summit, a silent, final salute to its master's defeated ideology. They stood in the aftermath, the four of them and their weary Pokémon, on the final ledge. The path ahead was clear. The summit, a flat, circular plateau of black, glittering stone, was just ahead. And the violet shimmer that had clung to the mountain, the shimmering cage of Palkia's power, began to crack. It started as a single, hairline fracture in the sky above the summit, accompanied by a sound like shattering glass that echoed across dimensions. Then another crack appeared, and another. The pocket dimension was breaking down. "It's coming," Cynthia said, her voice a grim whisper. They reached the summit just as the cage shattered completely. The sky tore open, not with the violent energy of the spear pillar, but with a silent, spreading tear. From the tear, the Silent One began to pour into their world. It was not a creature, not a being, but a presence. It was a tide of sentient nothingness, a wave of perfect, silent order that washed over the summit. The black stone beneath their feet lost its texture, becoming a flawless, smooth surface. The wind died. All sounds ceased. The very concept of temperature seemed to vanish, replaced by a perfect, neutral state. It did not rush at them. It did not threaten. It simply expanded. An unstoppable, silent tide that would smooth over all of creation, erasing every flaw, every imperfection, every chaotic spark of life, until all that was left was a single, perfect, silent unity. Ash stood before the expanding void, Pikachu in his arms, his friends at his back. He held the 3 creation orbs in his hand, feeling their immense, dormant power. He was no longer a boy playing at being a hero. He was the successor, facing his final duty. The conversation his ancestor had failed to finish was about to begin. Chapter 9 End. Chapter 10. The Master of Bonds. The end of the world was not a bang. It was a hush. The tide of sentient nothingness washed over the summit of the unseen pinnacle, and with it came a perfect, profound silence. The howling of the wind, the crunch of stone underfoot, the frantic beating of their own hearts. All were subsumed by a stillness that was not an absence of sound, but an active negation of it. Color bled from the world, the bruised twilight of the sky fading to a uniform, neutral gray. The biting cold vanished, replaced by a state of perfect, passionless equilibrium. It was not an attack, it was a correction. A smoothing of the chaotic, inefficient variables of existence. The Silent One expanded, and with it came the final, seductive argument. A wave of pure, flawless logic washed into their minds. A feeling of such profound and gentle peace that it was almost impossible to resist. It was the feeling of a difficult problem finally solved, of a cluttered room made clean, of a fever finally breaking. It was the promise of an end to all struggle. Brock's knees buckled. The lifetime of questions and uncertainties that drove his scientific mind offered a single, simple answer. Stop asking. Cynthia's hand, resting on Garchomp's flank, trembled as the weight of her duty as champion. The constant pressure to be a perfect symbol of strength was offered an effortless release. Serena felt the anxieties of her journey, the fear for Ash, the pressure of performance, the uncertainty of the future, dissolve into a calm, placid sea. Let go, it whispered to the deepest parts of their souls. The struggle is over. There is only peace. But their Pokémon, beings of pure, chaotic life force, would not yield. Garchomp let out a silent roar, its draconic aura a flare of defiance against the gray. Sylveon's ribbons wrapped protectively around Serena, glowing with a faint, defiant pink. Steelix formed a living wall of iron before Brock. Their bonds with their trainers, the illogical, inefficient attachments the Silent One sought to erase, were the last line of defense. They were anchors of beautiful, chaotic reality in an ocean of perfect, sterile logic. Ash stood at the forefront, Pikachu a warm, living weight in his arms. The 3 creation orbs in his pouch felt not like weapons, but like keys. The obsidian shard at his neck was a library of defiance. He felt the pull of the void, the sweet, logical song of surrender. He saw the world it offered. A flawless, silent utopia where no one would ever feel the pain of loss, the sting of betrayal, or the fear of failure. A world where he would never have to carry the weight of his legacy. And in that perfect world, he saw Serena's face, her beautiful, expressive smile replaced by a placid, serene emptiness. He saw Pikachu, his indomitable spirit smoothed over into quiet compliance. He saw a universe of puppets in a silent, cosmic play. "No," Ash said, and his voice, though it made no sound in the perfect silence, was a cataclysm. It was a shout of pure, defiant will, an act of rebellion that sent ripples through the placid sea of the void. The Silent One paused its expansion. For the first time, it focused its immense, dispassionate consciousness entirely on him. It did not understand the rejection. The data was illogical. It tried to explain. A vision flooded Ash's mind. He was standing in the heart of a galaxy, watching stars be born in fiery, chaotic explosions and die in silent, orderly collapses. He saw civilizations rise on a million worlds, all of them creating art, music, love, and war, hatred, and grief. He saw the same patterns repeat, over and over, an endless, inefficient cycle of joy and suffering, always ending in pain. The universe, the Silent One showed him, was a beautiful but flawed equation, and suffering was the remainder in every calculation. My purpose is to solve the equation, to eliminate the remainder. It was not a threat, it was a statement of purpose, an offer from a being that saw itself not as a conqueror, but as a cure. You're wrong, Ash projected back, his will a focused beam against the entity's vast consciousness. He looked at his friends, at their Pokémon holding the line, their vibrant life a stark contrast to the encroaching gray. He understood. The Grandmaster had been wrong. His ancestor had been wrong. This was not a monster to be sealed or a god to be enthroned. It was a student that had only ever been taught one lesson. He turned to his friends, his eyes blazing with a purpose that burned away all fear. Don't fight it, he said, his voice ringing in their minds. It only understands one thing. Logic. We have to give it a new set of data. He walked forward, alone, stepping out of the protective circle of his friends and their Pokémon. He walked to the very edge of the encroaching nothingness. Pikachu, sensing his partner's intent, leapt from his arms and stood beside him, a tiny, defiant spark against the void. Ash held out his hand. He did not hold a Pokeball. He held the smooth, cool stone of the obsidian shard. In his other hand, he took out the 3 orbs, and their combined power created a shimmering aura of gold, pink, and gray light around him, a bubble of raw, chaotic reality. He was the bridge. He was the master of bonds, and class was in session. You think life is an equation, Ash projected, his voice a symphony of every battle he had ever fought, every friend he had ever made. Let me show you the variables you missed. He plunged his consciousness into the void, using the orbs as his amplifier and the shard as his textbook. He did not push. He invited. He opened the floodgates of his memory, of his heart, of his very soul, and poured a lifetime of beautiful, illogical chaos into the perfect, sterile mind of the Silent One. The entity recoiled, not in pain, but in profound, overwhelming confusion. It was a supercomputer being fed an impossible, contradictory dataset. It experienced the sting of Charizard's disobedience in their early days, and the fierce, burning pride of their victory against an Articuno. Illogical, conflict leading to loyalty. It felt the sharp, bitter betrayal of Professor Carolina, the cold logic of her despair. And then it felt the unwavering, unshakable trust of Cynthia, Brock, and Serena, who had followed him into the heart of madness. Contradictory. The same variable, trust, producing opposite results. It experienced the terror of the spear pillar, the world tearing itself apart at the seams. And in the heart of that terror, It felt the sublime beauty of Dialga and Palkia bending to Ash's will, not out of servitude, but out of a shared, desperate respect. Paradoxical. Ultimate power yielding to profound vulnerability. And then, he showed it the most powerful, most illogical dataset of all. He showed it Serena. The Silent One experienced the quiet thrill of their first meeting. The shared laughter on the road. The fierce pride he felt watching her perform on stage. The quiet, profound peace of their kiss on the veranda. It experienced the terror of seeing her in danger and the fierce, protective fire that rose in his chest. It experienced love, not as a concept, but as a living, breathing, terrifying, and utterly magnificent force. It was data that had no place in its equation. It was a variable that broke every rule of its perfect, orderly universe. The expansion of the void stopped. It began to draw back, its perfect, smooth surface rippling, disturbed by the impossible data. For the first time in its ageless existence, the Silent One was learning. It was beginning to understand. Order, Ash projected, making his final argument. Without chaos, it is not peace. It is stagnation. It is an end to all growth, all possibility. A world without pain is a world without courage. A world without sadness is a world without joy. He showed it one final memory, the core of his ancestors' being, stored in the heart of the shard. The vision of the harmonious city, where people and Pokémon lived in a state of perfect, chaotic balance. That was true order. Not a sterile, silent unity, but a dynamic, vibrant harmony. Balance, Ash concluded. That is the true solution to the equation. The Silent One was silent. But it was a different kind of silence now. It was not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of contemplation. The vast, cosmic mind was processing. It was rewriting its own fundamental code. The tide of nothingness receded completely, drawing back into the tear in the sky from which it had come. The gray faded, the vibrant colors of their world washing back into existence. The oppressive silence shattered, and the sound of the wind, raw and alive, rushed back into their ears. It was the most beautiful sound they had ever heard. The tear in the sky did not seal. It remained, a calm, stable doorway to a dimension of pure order. A single, final thought emanated from it, a message not just for Ash, but for the entire world. The data is incomplete. The experiment continues. The balance will be observed. And then, the doorway faded, leaving behind the normal, flawed, beautiful twilight sky. It was over. They stood on the summit, the four of them, in the sudden, shocking quiet. They were exhausted, battered, and fundamentally changed. They had stood at the edge of oblivion and shown it the value of a smile. Cynthia was the first to move. She walked to Ash and placed a hand on his shoulder. Her eyes, usually so sharp and analytical, were filled with a profound, humbling awe. "The legends will call you the unbeaten trainer," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "But they won't understand the truth of it. It was never about the battles, was it?" Ash looked at his friends, at Pikachu now resting on his shoulder, and he smiled, a real, weary, and utterly genuine smile. It was always about the bonds. Serena rushed to him then, her arms wrapping around him in a fierce, desperate hug. There were no words, none were needed. Her embrace said everything. Brock clapped him on the back, his own face a mixture of relief and sheer, scientific wonder. They made their way down from the pinnacle, back into a world that was blissfully unaware of how close it had come to a perfect, silent end. The journey back was not filled with the same dread, but with a quiet, shared sense of victory. Days later, they stood on a hill overlooking a vibrant, bustling city. The world below was a symphony of beautiful chaos. Cars honked, people shouted and laughed, Pokémon called out to one another. It was messy, inefficient, and gloriously alive. "So, what's next?" Serena asked, her hand finding his, their fingers lacing together naturally. "You've faced down gods and talked a cosmic entity out of erasing reality. I think you've earned a vacation." Ash looked out at the city, at the endless horizon beyond. He felt the steady weight of Pikachu on his shoulder, the comforting warmth of Serena's hand in his. He was Ash Ketchum. He was a Pokémon trainer. He was the unbeaten. And his journey was far from over. "There's always another battle to fight," he said, a familiar, excited glint returning to his eyes. "Another friend to make. Another piece of this world to see." He squeezed her hand, his gaze meeting hers, a silent promise passing between them. He remained undefeated, not because he had never lost a single battle, but because he had never, not for a single moment, lost faith in the chaotic, illogical, and infinitely powerful bonds that held their beautiful, imperfect world together. And he never would. Chapter 10 End.